Chapter 1, The Street and the Studio. Time, 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the 10th day of July in the year of grace 1540. Place, the entrance to the Church des Grands Augustins, within the precincts of the university, by the receptacle for holy water near the door. A tall, handsome youth, olive-skinned, with long waving locks and great black eyes, simply but elegantly clad, his only weapon a little dagger with a hilt of marvelous workmanship, was standing there, and, doubtless from motives of pure piety and humility, had not stirred from the spot throughout the vesper service. With head bowed in an attitude of devout contemplation, he was murmuring beneath his breath I know not what words, his prayers, let us hope, for he spoke so low that none but himself and God could hear what he might say. As the service drew near its close, however, he raised his voice lightly, and they who stood nearest him could hear these half-audible words. How wretchedly these French monks drone out their psalms! Could they not sing more melodiously before her, whose ear should be accustomed to angels' voices? Ah, this is well. The vespers are at an end at last. Mon Dieu, grant that I be more fortunate today than on last Sunday, and that she do at least raise her eyes to my face. This last prayer was most artful, in very truth. For if she to whom it was addressed should chance to raise her eyes to the suppliant's face, she would see the most adorable youthful head that she had ever seen in dreams, while reading the 11 mythological tales which were so fashionable at the time, by virtue of the charming couplets of Master Clement Marot, and which told of the loves of Psyche and the death of Narcissus. Indeed, beneath his simple, sober-hued costume, the youth whom we have introduced to our readers was remarkably handsome, and wore an air of unmistakable refinement. Moreover, his smile was infinitely sweet and attractive, and his glance, which dared not yet be bold, was as ardent and impassioned as ever flashed from the great speaking eyes of 18 years. Meanwhile, upon hearing the movement of many chairs announcing the end of the service, our lover, for the reader will have discovered from the few words he has uttered that he is entitled to be so described, our lover, I say, drew aside a little and watched the congregation pass silently forth. A congregation composed of staid churchwardens, respectable matrons past their giddy days, and prepossessing damsels. But for none of these had the youth come thither, for his glance did not brighten, nor did he step impulsively forward, until he saw approach a maiden dressed in white, and attended by a duenna of high station, be it understood, who seemed accustomed to the ways of society, a duenna not unyouthful nor unattractive, and by no means savage in appearance. When the two ladies approached the basin of holy water, our youth took some of the liquid and gallantly offered it to them. The duenna bestowed the most gracious of smiles and most grateful of courtesies upon him, and even touched his fingers as she took the cup, which, to his great chagrin, she herself handed to her companion. But the latter, notwithstanding the fervent prayer whereof she had been the object a few moments before, kept her eyes constantly upon the ground, a sure proof that she knew the comely youth was there. So the comely youth, when she had passed, stamped upon the flags, muttering, Alas, again she did not see me. An equally sure proof that the comely youth was, as we have said, no more than 18 years old. But after the first burst of vexation, our unknown hastened down the steps of the church, and, seeing that the absent-minded beauty, having lowered her veil and taken her attendant's arm, had turned to the right, hastened to take the same direction, observing that his own home chanced to lie that way. The maiden followed the quay as far as Pont Saint-Michel, and crossed Pont Saint-Michel. Still it was our hero's road. She next passed through Rue de la Barillerie, and crossed Pont au Change, and as she was still pursuing our hero's road, our hero followed her like a shadow. Every pretty girl's shadow is a lover. But alas, when she reached the Grand Châtelet, the lovely star, whereof our unknown had made himself the satellite, was suddenly eclipsed. The wicket of the royal prison opened the instant that the duenna knocked, and closed again behind them. The young man was taken aback for a moment, but as he was a very decided fellow when there was no pretty girl at hand to weaken his resolution, he very soon made up his mind what course to pursue. A sergeant, pike on shoulder, was walking sedately back and forth before the door of the Châtelet. Our youthful unknown followed the example of the worthy sentinel, and, having walked on a short distance to avoid observation, but not so far as to lose sight of the door, he heroically began his amorous sentry-go. If the reader has ever done sentry duty in the course of his life, he must have noticed that one of the surest means of making the time pass quickly is to commune with oneself. Our hero doubtless was accustomed to such duty, for he had hardly begun his promenade when he addressed the following monologue to himself. Assuredly it cannot be that she lives in yonder prison. This morning after Mass, and these last 2 Sundays when I dared not follow her say with my eyes, duller that I was, she turned not to the right upon the quay, but to the left toward the Porte de Nesle and the Pre-Auxiliary Cleys. What the devil brings her to the Châtelet? What can it be? To see a prisoner. Perhaps her brother T is most like. Poor girl. She must suffer cruelly, for doubtless she is as sweet and kind as she is lovely. Pardieu, I'm sorely tempted to accost her, ask her frankly who it is, and offer my services. If it be her brother, I'll tell the patron the whole story, and ask his advice. When one has escaped from the castle of San Angelo, as he has, one has a shrewd idea of the best way to get out of prison. There's no more to be said. I'll save her brother. After I have rendered him such a service, he'll be my friend for life and death. Of course he'll ask me then what he can do for me when I have done so much for him. Then I'll confess that I love his sister. He'll present me to her, and then we'll see if she won't raise her eyes. Once launched upon such a course, we need not say how a lover's thoughts flow on unchecked. Thus it was that our youth was vastly amazed to hear the clock strike 4 and see the sentinel relieved. The new sergeant began his promenade, and the young man resumed his. His method of passing time had succeeded too well for him not to continue to make use of it, so he resumed his discourse upon a theme no less fruitful of ideas than the other. How lovely she is! How graceful every movement! How modest a bearing! How classic the outline of her features! There is in the whole world no other than Leonardo da Vinci or the divine Raphael, worthy to reproduce the image of that chaste and spotless being, nor will they prove equal to the task, save at the very zenith of their talent. O mon Dieu! Why am not I a painter, rather than a sculptor, worker in enamel, or goldsmith? First of all, were I a painter, there'd be no need I should ever before my eyes to make a portrait. I should never cease to see her great blue eyes, her beautiful blonde tresses, her pearly skin and slender form. Were I a painter, I should paint her face in every picture, as Sanzio did with Fornarina, and Andrea del Sarto with Lucrezia. And what a contrast betwixt her and Fornarina! In sooth, neither the one nor the other is worthy to unloose her shoelaces. In the first place, Fornarina. The youth was not the end of his comparisons, which were, as the reader will imagine, uniformly to the advantage of his inamorata when the hour struck. The second sentinel was relieved. 6 o'clock. "'T is strange how the time flies," muttered the youth. "And if it flies thus quickly while I wait for her, how should it be if I were by her side? Ah! By her side I should lose count of time. I should be in paradise. If I were by her side, I should but look at her, and so the hours and days and months would pass. What a blissful life that would be, mon Dieu!" And the young man lost himself in an ecstatic reverie, for his mistress, though absent, seemed to pass in person before his eyes, the eyes of a true artist. The third sentinel was relieved. 8 o'clock struck on all the parish churches, and the shades of night began to fall, for all authorities are in accord that the twilight hour in July 300 years ago was in the neighborhood of 8 o'clock, as now. But what is perhaps more astonishing than that is the fabulous perseverance of a 16th century lover. All passions were ardent in those days, and vigorous young hearts no more stopped short in love than in art or war. However, the patience of the young artist, for he has let us into the secret of his profession, was rewarded at last, when he saw the ponderous door of the Châtelet open for the 20th time, but this time to give passage to her for whom he was waiting. The same chaperone was still at her side, and furthermore, 2 archers of the provost guard followed 10 paces behind her, as escort. They retraced the steps they had taken 4 hours earlier, to wit the Pont au Change, Rue de la Barillerie, Pont Saint-Michel, and the quays. But they kept on by the Grands Augustines, and some 300 yards beyond paused before a huge door in a recess in the wall, beside which was another small door for the servants' use. The duenna knocked at the great door, which was opened by the porter. The 2 archers, after saluting their charge with the utmost respect, returned to the Châtelet, and our artist found himself standing for the second time outside a closed door. He would probably have remained there until morning, for he was fairly embarked on the fourth series of his dreams. But chance willed that a passerby, who had imbibed something too freely, collided violently with him. "Olade, friend," said the new arrival, "by your leave, are you a man or a post? If so be you're a post, you within your rights, and I respect you. But if you be a man, stand back and let me pass." "Pray pardon me," rejoined the distraught youth, "but I am a stranger in this good city of Paris, and—" "Oh, that's another matter. The Frenchman is always hospitable, and I ask your pardon. You're a stranger. Good. As you have told me who you are, it's only fair that I should tell you who I am. I am a student, and my name is—" "Excuse me," interposed the young artist, "but before I know who you are, I will be very glad to know where I am." "Port de Nesle, my dear friend. This is the Hotel de Nesle," said the student, with a glance at the great door from which the stranger had not once removed his eyes. "Very good. And to reach Rue Saint Martin, where I live, which direction must I take?" said our lovelorn youth, for the sake of saying something, and hoping thus to be rid of his companion. "Rue Saint Martin, do you say? Come with me. I'm going that way, and at Pont Saint Michel I'll show you how you must go. As I was saying, I am a student. I am returning from the pre-auxiliary clerks, and my name is—" "Do you know to whom the Hotel de Nesle belongs?" asked the young stranger. "Mary, I rather think I know my university. The Hotel de Nesle, young man, belongs to our lord, the king, and is at this moment in the hands of Robert d'Esterville, Provost of Paris." "How say you that the Provost of Paris lives there?" "By no means did I tell you that the Provost of Paris lives there. My son, the Provost of Paris lives at the Grand Châtelet." "Ah, yes, at the Grand Châtelet. Then that's the explanation. But how happens it that the Provost lives at the Grand Châtelet, and yet the king leaves a Hotel de Nesle in his possession? T is thus. The king, you see, had given the Hotel de Nesle to our bailli, a most venerable man, who stood guard over the privileges of the university, and tried all suits against it in most paternal fashion. Superb functions his. Unhappily, our excellent bailli was so just, to us, that his office was abolished 2 years since, upon the pretext that he used to sleep when hearing causes, as if bailli were not derived from baila, to yawn. His office being thus oppressed, the duty of protecting the interests of the university was entrusted to the Provost of Paris. A fine protector, on my word, as if we could not quite as well protect ourselves. How? Our said Provost, dost thou follow me, my child? Our said Provost, who is most rapacious, opined that, since he succeeded to the bailli's office, he ought at the same time to inherit his possessions, and so he quietly laid hold of the Grand and Petit Nesle, thanks to the patronage of Madame d'Etampes. And yet, you say, he does not occupy it. Not he, the villain. I think, however, that the old Cassandre lodges a daughter there, or niece, a lovely child called Colombe or Columbine, or some such name, and keeps her under lock and key in a corner of the Petit Nesle. Whence comest thou, O stranger, not to know that nothing comes to pass more naturally than this abuse, that we poor clerks should live 6 together in a wretched garret, while a great nobleman casts his immense property with its gardens, lawns, and tennis court to the dogs? Ah, there is a tennis court. But this Hotel de Nesle, you say, is actually the property of King Francois I. To be sure, but what would you have King Francois I do with this property of his? Why, give it to others, as the provost doesn't occupy it. Very good. Then go and ask it of him for yourself. Why not? Tell me, does the game of tennis please your fancy? I fairly dote on it. In that case, I invite you to a game with me next Sunday. Where, pray? At the Hotel de Nesle. Gramercy, my Lord Grand Master of the Royal Chateaus. T is meet that you should know my name at least. But as the young stranger knew all that he cared to know, and as the rest probably interested him but little, he heard not a word of his new friend's story, as he proceeded to tell him in detail that his name was Jacques Aubry, that he was a scrivener at the university, and was now returning from the pre-auxiliary clerks, where he had had an assignation with his tailor's wife, that she, detained no doubt by a ruffled spouse, did not appear, that he had consoled himself for Simon's absence by drinking good Suresne, and, lastly, that he proposed to withdraw his custom from the discourteous master snip, who compelled him to wear himself out with waiting, and to get tipsy, which was altogether opposed to all his habits. When the two young men reached Rue de la Harpe, Jacques Aubry pointed out to our unknown the road he was to follow, which he knew even better than his informant. They then made an appointment for the following Sunday at noon at the Porte de Nesle, and parted, one singing, the other dreaming. He who dreamed had abundant food for dreaming, for he had learned more during that one evening than in the 3 weeks preceding. He had learned that the maiden to whom he had given his heart lived at the Petit Nesle, that she was the daughter of Messire Robert d'Esteville, Provost of Paris, and that her name was Colombe. As will be seen, he had not wasted his day. Still dreaming, he turned into Rue Saint-Martin and stopped before a handsome house, over the door of which were carved the arms of the Cardinal of Ferrara. He knocked 3 times. "Who's they?" demanded a fresh, resonant young voice from within, after an interval of a few seconds. "I, Dame Catherine," replied the unknown. "Who are you?" "Ascanio." "Ah, at last." The door opened, and Ascanio entered. A charming girl of some 18 to 20 years, rather dark, rather small, very quick of movement, and admirably well shaped withal, welcomed him with transports of joy. "Here's the deserter. Here he is," she cried, and ran, or rather bounded on before, to announce him, extinguishing the lamp she carried, and leaving open the street door, which Ascanio, less giddy-pated than she, was careful to secure. The young man, although Dame Catherine's precipitation left him in darkness, walked with assured step across a courtyard of considerable size, in which every tile was surrounded by a border of rank weeds, the whole dominated by a somber mass of tall buildings of somewhat severe aspect. It was a frowning and humid dwelling place of a cardinal, although its master had not for a long time dwelt therein. Ascanio sprang lightly up a flight of moss-grown steps, and entered a vast hall, the only room in the house that was lighted, a sort of conventual refectory, ordinarily dark and gloomy and untenanted, but which for 2 months past had been filled with light and life and music. For 2 months past, in truth, this cold colossal cell had been instinct with bustling, laughing, good-humored life. For 2 months past, 10 workbenches, 2 anvils, and an improvised forge had seemed to lessen the size of the vast room. Sketches, models, benches laden with pincers, hammers, and files, sheaves of swords with chased hilts of marvelous workmanship, and carved open-work blades, helmets, cuirasses, and bucklers, gold embossed, whereon the loves of the gods and goddesses were, portrayed in relief, as if to turn the mind away from the purpose for which they were destined to be used, had covered the grayish walls. The sun had freely found its way in through the wide open windows, and the air had been filled with the songs of joyous, active workers. A cardinal's refectory had become a goldsmith's workshop. However, during this evening of July 10th, 1540, the sanctity of the Sabbath had temporarily restored to the newly enlivened apartment the tranquility in which it had lain dormant for a century. But a table, upon which the remains of an excellent supper lay about in confusion, lighted by a lamp which one would take to have been stolen from the ruins of Pompeii, of so chaste and delicate a form was it, proved that, if the temporary occupants of the cardinal's mansion did sometimes enjoy repose, they were in no wise addicted to fasting. When Ascanio entered, there were 4 persons in the workshop. These 4 persons were an old maidservant, who was removing the dishes from the table, Catherine, who was relighting the lamp, a young man sketching in a corner, and waiting for the lamp which Catherine had taken from before him in order to continue his work, and the master, standing with folded arms and leaning against the forge. The last would inevitably have been the first to be observed by anyone entering the workshop. Indeed, there was an indescribable impression of life and power which emanated from this remarkable personage, and attracted the attention even of those who would have chosen to withhold it. He was a tall, spare, powerful man of some 40 years, but it would have needed the chisel of Michelangelo or the pencil of Ribera to trace the outline of that clear-cut profile, to reproduce that sparkling olive complexion, to depict that bold, almost kingly expression. His lofty forehead towered above eyebrows quick to frown. His straightforward, piercing glance flashed at times with a light that was almost sublime. His frank, good-humored smile, albeit somewhat satirical, fascinated and awed you at the same time. He was accustomed to stroke his black beard and moustache with his hand, which was not precisely small, but nervous, supple, with long fingers and great strength, but withal slender and aristocratic. Lastly, in his way of looking at you, speaking, turning his head, in all his quick, expressive, but not intemperate gestures, even in the careless attitude in which he was standing when Ascanio entered, his strength made itself felt. The lion in repose was none the less a lion. Catherine and the apprentice working in the corner formed a most striking contrast to each other. The latter, a somber, taciturn fellow, with a narrow forehead already furrowed with wrinkles, half-shut eyes, and compressed lips. She as blithe as a bird and blooming as a flower, with the most mischievous of eyes always to be seen beneath her restless eyelids, and the whitest of teeth within her mouth, constantly half opened with a smile. The apprentice, buried in his corner, was slow and languid in his movements, as if economizing his strength. Catherine was here and there, going and coming, never remaining 1 second in one spot. So did her youthful active organization overflow with life and spirits, and feel the need of constant movement in default of excitement. Thus she was a fairy of the household, a very skylark by virtue of her vivacity, and a clear, piercing note, beginning life with such a joyous disregard of everything beyond the moment as to fully justify the surname of Scotsone which the master had given her, an Italian word which signified then, and still signifies, something very like cascue, breakneck. And yet, with all her childish ways, Scotsone was so instinct with witchery and charm that she was the life and soul of the household. When she sang, all the others were silent. When she laughed, they laughed with her. When she ordered, they obeyed without a word, albeit she was not ordinarily exacting in her caprice. And then she was so frankly and innocently happy that she diffused an atmosphere of good humor wherever she went, and it made others glad to see her gladness. Her story was an old, old story, to which we may perhaps recur. An orphan, born of the people, she was abandoned in her infancy, but God protected her. Destined to afford pleasure to everybody, she met a man to whom she afforded pure happiness. Having introduced these new characters, we now resume the thread of our narrative where we let it drop. Aha! Whence comest thou? Get a boat, said the master to Ascanio. Whence do I come? I come from getting about for you, master. Since morning? Since morning. Say rather that thou hast been in quest of adventure. What manner of adventure should I have been in quest of, master? Murmured Ascanio. How can I know, pray? Well, and if it was so, where's the harm? Interposed Scotsone. Indeed, he's a pretty boy enough to have adventures run after him, even though he run not after adventures. Scotsone, said the master with a frown. Come, don't you be jealous of him, too, poor, dear boy. And she raised Ascanio's chin with her hand. Ah, well, it only needed that. But, Jesu, how pale you are. Does it happen that you haven't supped, Monsieur Vagabond? Faith, no, cried Ascanio. I forgot it. Aho, in that case I take side with the master. He forgot that he had not supped, so he must be in love. Ruperta, bring supper for Messiah Ascanio at once. The servant produced several dishes of appetizing relics of the evening meal, which our hero pounced upon with an appetite by no means unnatural after his prolonged exercise in the open air. Scotsone and the master watched him, smiling the while, one with sisterly affection, the other with a father's love. The young man at work in the corner had raised his head when Ascanio entered, but as soon as Scotsone replaced in front of him the lamp she had taken when she railed to open the door, he bent his head over his work once more. I was saying, master, that it was for you I had been running about all day, resumed Ascanio, noticing the mischievous expression of the master and Scotsone, and desiring to lead the conversation to some other subject than his love affairs. How hast thou run about all day for me? Let us hear. Did you not say yesterday that the light was very bad here, and that you must have another studio? Even so. Well, I have found one for you. Dost thou hear, Pagolo? Said the master, turning to the young man in the corner. What did you say, master? He asked, raising his head a second time. Come, lay aside thy work a moment, and listen to this. He has found a workshop. Dost thou hear? Pardon, master, but I can hear very well from here what my friend Ascanio may say. I would like to complete this study. It seems to me that it is well, when one has piously fulfilled the duties of a Christian on the Sabbath day, to employ one's leisure in some profitable exercise. To work is to pray. Pagolo, my friend, said the master, shaking his head more in sadness than in anger, you would do better, believe me, to work more assiduously and heartily through the week, and enjoy yourself on Sunday like a good comrade, than idle as you do on ordinary days, and hypocritically set yourself apart from the others by feigning so much ardor in your work on fete days. But you are your own master. Act as seems good to you. And thou sayest, Ascanio, my child, he continued in a tone in which infinite gentleness and affection were mingled, I say that I have found a magnificent workshop for you. Way! Do you know the Hotel de Nesle? Perfectly. That is, by having passed before it, for I have never been within the door. But is its exterior attractive in your eyes? Pardieu, it is indeed. But what? But does no one occupy it? Pray? Mary, yes, Monsieur the Provost of Paris, Messiah Robert d'Esterville, who has taken possession of it without right. Moreover, to satisfy your scruples on that head, we might with great propriety leave him the Petit Nesle, where some one of his family now dwells, I think, and be content ourselves with the Grand Nesle, and its courtyards, lawns, and bowling greens and tennis court. There is a tennis court, finer than that of Santa Croce at Florence. Yes, and then, master, over and above all that, a superb location, everywhere, and such a perfect country, and not such as we get here in this infernal corner, where we are molding, forgotten by the sun. The pre-auxiliary clerks on one side, the saint on the other, and the king, your great king, only 2 steps away, in his Louvre. But whose is this devil of a hotel? Whose, say you? Pardieu, the king's. The king's? Say me that once more, my child. The Hotel de Nesle is the king's. His own. Now it remains to ascertain if he will give you so magnificent a dwelling place. Why, Francois, if I am not mistaken. Which means that the Hotel de Nesle will be my property within the week. But it may be that the Provost of Paris will take offense. What care I for that? But suppose he will not let go what he has in his hand. Suppose he will not. What do men call me, Ascanio? They call you Benvenuto Cellini, master. Which means that if the worthy provost will not do things with good grace, why, we will use force to compel him to do them. And now let us to bed. Tomorrow we'll speak further on the matter, and then the sun will shine, and we shall see more clearly. At the master's suggestion, all retired except Pagolo, who remained for some time at work in his corner. But as soon as he believed that all was safely in bed, the apprentice rose, looked about, drew near the table, and poured for himself a large cup of wine, which he swallowed at a draught. Then he too went off to bed. Chapter 2a Goldsmith of the 16th century. Since we have drawn the portrait and mentioned the name of Benvenuto Cellini, we crave the reader's permission that he may the more understandingly approach the artistic subject of which we propose to treat, to indulge in a short digression upon this extraordinary man, who at this time had been living in France for 2 months, and who is destined to become one of the principal characters of this history. But first of all, let us say a word as to the goldsmiths of the 16th century. There is at Florence a bridge called the Ponte Vecchio, which is covered with houses to this day. These houses were in the old days goldsmith shops. But the word is not to be understood as we understand it today. The goldsmith of our day follows a trade. Formerly, the goldsmith was an artist. So it was that there was nothing in the world so wondrously beautiful as these shops, or rather as the articles with which they were stocked. There were round cups of onyx, around which dragons' tails were twined, while heads and bodies of those fabulous creatures confronted one another with gold-bespangled sky-blue wings outspread, and with jaws wide open like chimeras, shot threatening glances from their ruby eyes. There were years of agate, with a festoon of ivy clinging round the base, and climbing up in guise of handle well above the orifice, concealing amid its emerald foliage some marvelous bird from the tropics, in brilliant plumage of enamel, seemingly alive and ready to burst forth in song. There were urns of lapis lazuli, over the edge of which leaned, as if to drink, lizards chiseled with such art that one could almost see the changing reflection of their golden cuirasses, and might have thought that they would fly at the least sound, and seek shelter in some crevice in the wall. Then there were chalices and monstrances, and bronze and gold and silver medallions, all studded with precious stones, as if in those days rubies, topazes, carbuncles, and diamonds could be found by searching in the sand on river banks, or in the dust of the highroad. And there were nymphs, naiads, gods, goddesses, a whole resplendent Olympus, mingled with crucifixes, crosses, and calvaries, Mater Dolorosas, Venuses, Christs, Apollos, Jupiters launching thunderbolts, and Jehovah's creating the world, and all this not only cleverly executed, but poetically conceived, not only admirable, viewed as ornaments for a woman's boudoir, but magnificent masterpieces fit to immortalize the reign of a king or the genius of a nation. To be sure, the goldsmiths of that epoch bore the names of Donatello, Ghiberti, Ghirlandajo, and Benvenuto Cellini. Now, Benvenuto Cellini has himself described in his memoirs, which are more interesting than the most interesting novel, the adventurous life of the artists of the 15th and 16th centuries, when Titian was painting in coat of mail, when Michelangelo was sculpturing with his sword at his side, when Masaccio and Domenichino died of poison, and Cosmo I secluded himself in his laboratory to discover the mode of tempering steel so that it would cut porphyry. To show the character of the man, we will take a single episode in his life, that which was the occasion of his coming to France. The result was that one of his confreres, named Pompeo, who had nothing to do but slander his betters, took advantage of the delay to do him all possible injury in the Pope's sight, and kept at work persistently, day in and day out, without truce or relaxation, sometimes in undertones, sometimes aloud, assuring him that he would never finish it, and that he was so overwhelmed with orders that he executed those of other people to the neglect of his holinesses. He said and did so much, did good Pompeo, that when Benvenuto Cellini saw him enter his workshop one day with smiling Fei, he divined at once that he was a bearer of bad news for him. "Well, my dear confrere," Pompeo began, "I have come to relieve you from a heavy burden. His Holiness realizes that your neglect in completing his chalice is not due to lack of zeal, but to lack of time. He therefore considers it no more than just to relieve you from some one of your important duties, and of his own motion he dismisses you from the post of engraver to the mint. It will be 9 paltry ducats a month less in your pocket, but an hour more each day at your disposal." Benvenuto was conscious of an intense longing to throw the jeering varlet out a window, but he restrained his feelings, and Pompeo, seeing that not a muscle of his face moved, thought that he had missed his aim. "Furthermore," he continued, "why, I know not, but in spite of all I could say in your behalf, His Holiness demands his chalice at once, in whatever condition it may be. Verily, I am afraid, de Benvenuto, I say it in all friendliness, that 'tis his purpose to have some other finish it." "Oh, no, not that," cried the goldsmith, starting up like one bitten by a serpent. "My chalice is my own, even as the office at the mint is the Pope's. His Holiness hath no right to do more than bid me return the 500 crowns paid to me in advance, and I will dispose of my work as may seem good to me." "Beware, my master," said Pompeo. "Imprisonment may be the sequel of your refusal." "Signore Pompeo, you're an ass," retorted Benvenuto. Pompeo left the shop in a rage. On the following day, 2 of the Holy Father's chamberlains called upon Benvenuto Cellini. "The Pope has sent us," said one of them, "either to receive the chalice at your hands, or to take you to prison." "Monsignori," rejoined Benvenuto, "an artist like myself deserved no less than to be given in charge to functionaries like yourselves. Here I am, take me to prison. But I give you fair warning that all this will not put the Pope's chalice forward one stroke of the graver. Benvenuto went with them to the governor of the prison, who, having doubtless received his instructions in advance, invited him to dine with him. Throughout the repast, the governor used every conceivable argument to induce Benvenuto to satisfy the Pope by carrying the chalice to him, assuring him that, if he would make that concession, Clement VII, violent and obstinate as he was, would forget his displeasure. But the artist replied that he had already shown the Holy Father his chalice 6 times since he began it, and that was all that could justly be required of him. Moreover, he said he knew His Holiness, and that he was not to be trusted, that he might very well, when he had the chalice in his hands, take it from him altogether, and give it to some idiot to finish, who would spoil it. He reiterated his readiness to return the 500 crowns paid in advance. Having said so much, Benvenuto met all subsequent arguments of the governor by exalting his cook to the skies and praising his wines. After dinner, all his compatriots, all his dearest friends, all his apprentices, led by Ascanio, called upon him to implore him not to rush headlong to destruction by resisting the commands of Clement VII. But Benvenuto told them that he had long desired to establish the great truth that a goldsmith can be more obstinate than a pope, and as the most favorable opportunity he could ask for was now at hand, he certainly would not let it pass, for fear that it might not return. His compatriots withdrew, shrugging their shoulders, his friends vowing that he was mad, and Ascanio weeping bitterly. Fortunately, Pompeo did not forget Cellini, and meanwhile he was saying slyly to the Pope, "Most Holy Father, give your servant a free hand. I will send word to this obstinate fellow that, since he is so determined, he may send me the 500 crowns, as he is a notorious spendthrift. He will not have that sum at his disposal, and will be compelled to give up the chalice to me." Clement considered this an excellent device, and bade Pompeo do as he suggested. And so, that same evening, as Cellini was about to be taken to the cell assigned him, a chamberlain made his appearance, and informed the goldsmith that His Holiness accepted his ultimatum, and demanded the delivery of the chalice or the 500 crowns without delay. Benvenuto replied that they had but to take him to his workshop, and he would give them the 500 crowns. The chamberlain returned forthwith to the Holy Father, and delivered the 500 crowns, whereupon His Holiness, in his desperation, flew into a violent rage, and began to abuse Pompeo. "Go thyself to my great engraver at his workshop, animal," he said. "Employ all the soothing arguments of which thy ignorant folly is capable, and say to him that if he will consent to finish my chalice, I will give him whatever facilities he may require." "But, Your Holiness," said Pompeo, "will it not be time tomorrow morning?" "I fear lest it be already too late this evening, imbecile, and I do not choose that Benvenuto shall sleep upon his wrath. Therefore do my bidding on the instant, and let me not fail to have a favorable reply tomorrow morning at my levee." Pompeo thereupon left the Vatican with drooping feathers, and repaired to Benvenuto's workshop. It was closed. He peered through the keyhole and through the cracks in the door, and scrutinized all the windows, one after another, to see if there was not one which showed a light, but all were dark. He ventured to knock a second time, somewhat louder than at first, and then a third time, still louder. Thereupon a window on the first floor opened, and Benvenuto appeared in his shirt, arquebus in hand. "Who's there?" he demanded. "I," the messenger replied. "Who art thou?" rejoined the goldsmith, although he recognized his man at once. "Pompo." "Thou liest," said Benvenuto. "I know Pompo well, and he is far too great a coward to venture out into the streets of Rome at this hour. But, my dear Cellini, I swear—" "Hold thy peace. Thou art a villain, and hast taken the poor devil's name to induce me to open my door, and then to rob me. Master Benvenuto, may I die." "Say but another word," cried Benvenuto, pointing the arquebus toward his interlocutor, "and that wish of thine will be gratified." Pompeo fled at full speed, crying "murder," and disappeared around a corner of the nearest street. Benvenuto thereupon closed his window, hung his arquebus on its nail, and went to bed once more, laughing in his beard at poor Pompeo's fright. The next morning, as he went down to his shop, which had been opened an hour earlier by his apprentices, he spied Pompeo on the opposite side of the street, where he had been doing sentry duty since daybreak, waiting to see him descend. As soon as he saw Cellini, Pompeo waved his hand to him in the most affectionately friendly way imaginable. "Ah," said Cellini, "is it you, my dear Pompeo? By my faith, I was within an ace last night of making a churl pay dearly for his insolence in assuming your name." "Indeed," said Pompo, forcing himself to smile, and drawing gradually nearer to the shop. "How did it happen, pray?" Benvenuto thereupon described the incident to His Holiness's messenger, but as his friend Benvenuto had described him in the nocturnal interview as a coward, Pompeo did not dare confess his identity with the visitor. When his tale was finished, Cellini asked Pompeo to what happy circumstance he was indebted for the honor of so early a visit from him. Pompeo thereupon acquitted himself, but in somewhat different terms, be it understood, of the errand upon which Clement VII had sent him to his goldsmith. Benvenuto's features expanded as he proceeded. Clement VII yielded. Ergo the goldsmith had been more obstinate than the Pope. "Say to His Holiness," said Benvenuto, when the message was duly delivered, "that I shall be very happy to obey him and to do anything in my power to regain his favor, which I have lost, not by any fault of my own, but through the evil machinations of envious rivals. As for yourself, Signore Pompeo, as the Pope does not lack retainers, I counsel you, in your own interest, to look to that another than you is sent to me hereafter. For your health's sake, Signore Pompeo, interfere no more in my affairs. In pity for yourself, never happen in my path, and for the welfare of my soul, Pompeo, pray God that I be not your Caesar." Some time thereafter, in order to put the seal to his reconciliation with Benvenuto, Clement VII ordered his medallion struck by him. Benvenuto struck it in bronze, in silver, and in gold, and then carried it to him. The Pope was so enraptured with it that he cried out in his admiration that so beautiful medallion had never been produced by the ancients. "Ah, well, your Holiness," said Benvenuto, "had not I displayed some firmness, we should have been at enmity today, for I would never have forgiven you, and you would have lost a devoted servant. Look you, holy bather," he continued, by way of good counsel, "your Holiness would not do ill to remember now and then the opinion of many discreet folk, that one should bleed 7 times before cutting once, and you would do well also to allow yourself to be something less easily made the dupe of lying tongues and envious detractors. So much for your guidance in future, and we will say no more about it, most holy Father." Thus did Benvenuto pardon Clement VII, which he certainly would not have done had he loved him less. But, as a compatriot, he was deeply attached to him. Great, therefore, was his sorrow when the Pope suddenly died, a few months subsequent to the episode we have described. The man of iron burst into tears at the news, and for a week he wept like a child. The pontiff's demise was doubly calamitous to poor Cellini. On the very day of his burial he met Pompeo, whom he had not seen since the day when he bade him spare him the too frequent infliction of his presence. It should be said that since Cellini's dire threats, the unhappy Pompeo had not dared to go out unless accompanied by a dozen men well armed, to whom he gave the same pay that the Pope gave his Swiss guards, so that every walk that he took in the city cost him 2 or 3 crowns. And even when surrounded by his 12 sbirri, he trembled at the thought of meeting Benvenuto Cellini, for he knew that if the meeting should result in a fray, and any mishap should befall the goldsmith, the Pope, who was really very fond of him, would make him, Pompo, pay dearly for it. But, as we have said, Clement VII was dead, and his death restored some little courage to Pompeo. Benvenuto had been to St. Peter's to kiss the feet of the deceased pontiff, and was returning through the street Dei Banchi, accompanied by Pagolo and Ascanio, when he found himself face to face with Pompeo and his 12 men. At the sight of his enemy, Pompo became very pale, but as he looked around and saw how amply provided he was with defenders, while Benvenuto had only 2 boys with him, he took heart of grace, halted, and nodded his head mockingly, while he toyed with the hilt of his dagger with his right hand. At sight of this group of men by whom his master was threatened, Ascanio put his hand to his sword, while Pagolo pretended to be looking in another direction. But Benvenuto did not choose to expose his beloved pupil to so unequal a conflict. He laid his hand upon Ascanio's, pushing the half-drawn blade back into the scabbard, and walked on as if he had seen nothing, or as if he had taken no offense at what he saw. Ascanio could hardly recognize his master in such guise, but as his master withdrew, he withdrew with him. Pompeo triumphantly made a deep salutation to Benvenuto, and pursued his way, still surrounded by his sbirri, who imitated his bravado. Benvenuto bit his lips till the blood came, while externally his features wore a smile. His behavior was inexplicable to anyone who knew the irascible nature of the illustrious goldsmith. But they had not proceeded 100 yards when he stopped before the workshop of one of his confrères, and went in, alleging as a pretext his desire to see an antique vase which had recently been found in the Etruscan tombs of Corneto. He bade his pupils go on to the shop, and promised to join them there in a few moments. As the reader will understand, this was only a pretext to get Ascanio out of the way. For as soon as he thought that the young man and his companion, concerning whom he was less anxious because he was sure that such courage as he possessed would not carry him too far, had turned the corner of the street, he replaced the vase upon the shelf from which he took it, and darted out of the shop. With 3 strides Benvenuto was in the street where he had met Pompeo, but Pompeo was no longer there. Luckily, or rather unluckily, this man, encompassed by his 12 sbirri, was a noticeable object, and so when Benvenuto inquired as to the direction he had taken, the first person to whom he applied was able to give him the information, and like a bloodhound that has recovered a lost scent, Benvenuto started in pursuit. Pompo had stopped at a druggist's door, at the corner of the Giavica, and was vaunting to the worthy compounder of drugs the prowess he had shown in his meeting with Benvenuto Cellini, when his eye suddenly fell upon the latter turning the corner of the street, with fire in his eye and the perspiration streaming down his forehead. Benvenuto shouted exultantly as he caught sight of him, and Pompeo stopped short in the middle of his sentence. It was evident that something terrible was about to happen. The bravos formed a group around Pompeo and drew their swords. It was an insane performance for one man to attack 13, but Benvenuto was, as we have said, one of those leonine creatures who do not count their enemies. Against the 13 swords which threatened him, he drew a small keen-edged dagger which he always wore in his girdle, and rushed into the center of the group, sweeping aside 2 or 3 swords with one arm, overturning 2 or 3 men with the other, until he made his way to where Pompeo stood, and seized him by the collar. But the group at once closed upon him. Thereupon naught could be seen save a confused, struggling mess, whence issued loud shouts, and above which swords were waving. For a moment the living mass rolled on the ground, in shapeless, inextricable confusion. Then a man sprang to his feet with a shout of triumph, and with a mighty effort forced his way out of the group as he made his way in, bleeding himself, but triumphantly waving his blood-stained dagger. It was Benvenuto Cellini. Another man remained upon the pavement, writhing in the agony of death. He had received 2 blows from the dagger, one below the ear, the other at the base of the neck behind the collarbone. In a few seconds he breathed his last. It was Pompeo. Any other than Benvenuto, after such a deed, would have taken himself off at full speed, but he passed his dagger to his left hand, drew his sword, and resolutely awaited the spur. But the spur had no further business with Benvenuto. He who paid them was dead, and consequently could pay them no more. They ran off like a flock of frightened rabbits, leaving Pompeo's body where it lay. At that juncture Ascanio appeared, and rushed into his master's arms. He was not deceived by the ruse of the Etruscan vase, but although he had made all possible speed, he arrived a few seconds too late. Chapter 3, Dallas. Benvenuto returned to his abode with Ascanio, somewhat ill at ease, not because of the 3 wounds he had received, which were all too slight to occasion him any anxiety, but because of the possible results of the affray. 6 months before, he had killed Guascondi, his brother's murderer, but had come off scot-free by virtue of the protection of Pope Clement VII. Moreover, that act was committed by way of reprisal, but now Benvenuto's protector had gone the way of all flesh, and the prospect was much more ominous. Remorse, be it understood, did not disturb him for one moment. But we beg our readers not for that reason to form an unfavorable opinion of our worthy goldsmith, who after killing a man, after killing 2 men perhaps, indeed, if we search his past very carefully, after killing 3 men, although he had a wholesome dread of the watch, did not for one instant fear to meet his God. For this man, in the year of grace 1540, was an ordinary man, an everyday man, as the Germans say. Men thought so little of dying in those days that they naturally came to think very little of killing. We are brave today, but the men of those days were foolhardy. We are men grown. They were hot-headed youths. Life was so abundant in those days that men lost it, gave it, sold it, nay, even took it, with absolute indifference and recklessness. There was once an author who was calumniated and abused for many years, whose name was made a synonym for treachery, cruelty, and all the words which mean infamy. And it needed this 19th century, the most impartial since the birth of humanity, to rehabilitate that author as the grand patriot and noble-hearted man he was. And yet Niccolo Machiavelli's only crime was that he lived in an epoch when brute strength and success were all in all, when folk judged by deeds, not words, and when such men as Caesar Borgia the sovereign, Machiavelli the thinker, and Benvenuto Cellini the artisan marched straight to their goal, without thought of methods or reasons. One day a body was found in the public square of Cesena, cut in 4 pieces. It was the body of Ramiro d'Orco. Now, as Ramiro d'Orco was a considerable personage in Italy, the Florentine Republic sought to ascertain the causes of his death. The aide of the Signoria therefore wrote to Machiavelli, their ambassador at Cesena, to satisfy their curiosity. But Machiavelli made no other reply than this. Magnificent Signoria, I have naught to say anent the death of Ramiro d'Orco, save this, that no prince in the world is so skillful as Caesar Borgia in the art of making and unmaking men according to their deserts. Machiavelli. Benvenuto was an exponent of the theory enunciated by the illustrious secretary of the Florentine Republic, Benvenuto the genius, Caesar Borgia the prince. Both considered themselves above the laws by virtue of their power. In their eyes, the distinction between what was just and what was unjust was identical with the distinction between what they could and what they could not do. Of right and duty they had not the slightest conception. A man stood in their path. They suppressed a man. Today, civilization does him the honor of purchasing him. But in those old days, the blood was boiling so abundantly in the veins of the young nations that they shed it for their health's sake. They fought by instinct, not for their country to any great extent, not for women to any great extent, but largely for the sake of fighting, nation against nation, man against man. Benvenuto made war upon Pompo as Francois I did upon Charles V. France and Spain fought an intermittent duel, now at Marignano, and again at Pavia, all as if it were the most natural thing in the world, without preamble, without long harangues, without lamentation. In the same way, genius was exercised by those who possess it as an innate faculty, as an absolute royal power based upon divine right. Art in the 16th century was looked upon as the natural birthright of man. We must not therefore wonder at these men who wondered at nothing. We have, to explain their homicides, their whims, and their faults, an expression which explains and justifies everything in our country, especially in these days of ours. That was the fashion. Benvenuto therefore did simply what it was a fashion to do. Pompeo annoyed Benvenuto Cellini, and Benvenuto suppressed Pompeo. But the police occasionally investigated these acts of suppression. They were very careful not to protect a man when he was alive, but perhaps once in 10 times they showed a feeble desire to avenge him when he was dead. They experienced such a desire in the matter of Pompeo and Benvenuto Cellini. As the goldsmith, having returned to his shop, was putting certain papers in the fire and some money in his pocket, he was arrested by the pontifical sbirri and taken to the castle of St. Angelo, an occurrence for which he was almost consoled by the reflection that the castle of St. Angelo was where noblemen were imprisoned. But another thought that was no less efficacious in bringing consolation to Cellini as he entered the castle was this, that a man endowed with so inventive a mind as his need not long delay about leaving it, in one way or another. And so, when he was taken before the governor, who was sitting at a table covered with a green cloth and looking through a great pile of papers, he said, Sir Governor, multiply your locks and bolts and sentinels threefold. Confine me in your highest cell or in your deepest dungeon. Keep close watch upon me all day and lie awake all night. And yet I warn you that, despite all that, I will escape. The governor looked up at the prisoner who addressed him with such unheard of assurance and recognized Benvenuto Cellini. whom he had had the honor of entertaining 3 months before. Notwithstanding his acquaintance with the man, perhaps because of it, Benvenuto's allocution caused the worthy governor the most profound dismay. He was a Florentine, one Master Giorgio, a knight of the Ugolini, and an excellent man, but somewhat weak in the head. However, he soon recovered from his first surprise, and ordered Benvenuto to be taken to the highest cell in the castle. The platform was immediately above it. A sentinel was stationed on the platform, and another sentinel at the foot of the wall. The governor called the prisoner's attention to these details, and when he thought that he had had time to digest them, he said, "My dear Benvenuto, one may open locks, force doors, dig out from an underground dungeon, make a hole through a wall, bribe sentinels, and put jailers to sleep, but without wings one cannot descend to earth from this height." "I will do it, nevertheless," said Cellini. The governor looked him in the eye, and began to think that his prisoner was mad. "Why, in that case, you propose to fly?" "Why not? I have always believed that man can fly, but I have lacked time to make the experiment. Here I shall have time enough, and, Padju, I mean to solve the problem. The adventure of Daedalus's history, not fable." "Beware the sun, dear Benvenuto," sneeringly replied the governor. "Beware the sun." "I will fly away by night," said Benvenuto. The governor was not expecting that reply, so that he had no suitable repartee at hand, and withdrew in a rage. In good sooth, it was most important that Benvenuto should make his escape at any price. At another time, he would not have been at all perturbed because he had killed a man, and would have been quit of all responsibility by following the procession of the Virgin in August, clad in a doublet and cloak of blue armoison. But the new Pope, Paul III, was vindictive to the last degree, and when he was still Monsignor Farnese, Benvenuto had had a crow to pluck with him, apropos of a vase which the goldsmith refused to deliver until paid for, and which his eminence sought to procure by force. The result being to subject Benvenuto to the dire necessity of using his eminence's retainers somewhat roughly. Moreover, the Holy Father was jealous because King Francois I had commanded Monsignor de Montluc, his ambassador to the Holy See, to request that Benvenuto be sent to France. When he was informed of Benvenuto's imprisonment, Monsignor de Montluc urged the request more strenuously than before, thinking thereby to render the unfortunate prisoner service. But he was entirely unfamiliar with the character of the new pope, who was even more obstinate than his predecessor, Clement VII. Now Paul III had sworn that Benvenuto should pay dearly for his escapade, and if he was not precisely in danger of death, a pope would have thought twice in those days before ordering such an artist to the gallows. He was in great danger of being forgotten in his prison. It was therefore the utmost importance that Benvenuto should not forget himself, and that was why he was determined to take flight without awaiting the interrogatories and judgment, which might never have arrived. For the Pope, angered by the intervention of Francois I, refused even to hear Benvenuto Cellini's name mentioned. The prisoner knew all this from Ascanio, who was managing his establishment, and who, by dint of persistent entreaties, had obtained permission to visit his master. Their interviews, of course, were held through 2 iron gratings, and in presence of witnesses watching to see that the pupil passed neither file, nor rope, nor knife to his master. As soon as the door of his cell was locked behind the governor, Benvenuto set about inspecting his surroundings. The following articles were contained within the 4 walls of his new abiding place: a bed, a fireplace, a table, and 2 chairs. 2 days after his installation there, he obtained a supply of clay and a modeling tool. The governor at first declined to allow him to have these means of distraction, but he changed his mind upon reflecting that, if the artist's mind were thus employed, he might perhaps abandon the idea of escape, to which he clung so tenaciously. The same day, Benvenuto sketched a colossal Venus. All this of itself was no great matter, but in conjunction with imagination, patience, and energy, it was much. On a certain very cold day in December, when the fire was lighted on the hearth, the servant changed the sheets on his bed and left the soiled ones upon a chair. As soon as the door was closed, Benvenuto made one bound from the chair on which he was sitting to the bed, took out of the mattress 2 enormous handfuls of the maize leaves which he used to stuff mattresses in Italy, stowed the sheets away in their place, returned to his statue, took up his tool and resumed his work. At that moment, the servant returned for the forgotten sheets, and after looking everywhere for them, asked Benvenuto if he had not seen them. But he replied carelessly, as if absorbed by his work, that some of his fellows doubtless had taken them, or that he carried them away himself without knowing it. The servant had no suspicion of the truth. So little time had elapsed since he left the room, and Benvenuto played his part so naturally. And as the sheets were never found, he was very careful to say nothing, for fear of being obliged to pay for them or of losing his employment. One who has never lived through some supreme crisis can form no idea of the possibilities of such a time in the way of terrible catastrophes and poignant anguish. The most trivial accidents of life arouse in us joy or despair. As soon as the servant left the room, Benvenuto fell upon his knees, and thanked God for the help he had sent him. As his bed was never touched until the next morning, after it was once made, he quietly left the sheets in the mattress. When the night came, he began to cut the sheets, which luckily were new and strong, in strips 3 or 4 inches wide, then tied them together as securely as he could. Lastly, he cut open his statue, which was of clay, hollowed it out, placed his treasure in the cavity, then spread clay over the wound, and smoothed it off with his finger and his modeling tool, until the most skillful artist could not have discovered that poor Venus had been made to undergo the cesarean operation. The next morning the governor entered the prisoner's cell unexpectedly, as he was accustomed to do, but found him as usual calm and hard at work. Every morning the poor man, who had been specially threatened for the night, trembled lest he should find the cell empty, and it should be said, in justice to his frankness, that he did not conceal his joy every morning when he found it occupied. "I confess that you make me terribly anxious, Benvenuto," said the poor man. "However, I begin to think that your threats of escape amount to nothing." "I don't threaten you, Master Giorgio," rejoined Benvenuto. "I warn you. Do you still hope to fly away?" "Luckily it isn't a mere hope, but downright certainty. Padju." "Demonio, how will you do it?" cried the poor governor, dismayed beyond measure by Benvenuto's real or pretended confidence in his means of escape. "That's my secret, master, but I give you fair warning that my wings are growing." The governor instinctively turned his eye upon the prisoner's shoulders. "'T is thus," continued Benvenuto, working away at his statue and rounding the hips in such fashion that one would have thought he proposed to rival the Venus colipage. "Betwixt us there is a duel impending. You have on your side enormous towers, thick doors, strong bolts, innumerable keepers always on the alert. I have on my side my brain and these poor hands, and I warn you very frankly that you will be beaten. But as you are a very clever man, as you have taken every possible precaution, you will at least, when I am gone, have the consolation of knowing that it is through no fault of yours, Master Giorgio, that you have no occasion to reproach yourself at all, Master Giorgio, and that you neglected nothing that could help you to detain me, Master Giorgio. And now what say you to this hip? For you are a lover of art, I know." Such unblushing assurance enraged the unhappy official. His prisoner had become his fixed idea, upon which all his faculties were centered. He grew melancholy, lost his appetite, and started constantly, like one suddenly aroused from sleep. One night Benvenuto heard a great noise upon the platform. Then it was transferred to his corridor and finally stopped at his door. The door opened, and he saw Master Giorgio, in dressing gown and nightcap, attended by 4 jailers and 8 guards. The governor rushed to his bedside with distorted features. Benvenuto sat up in bed and laughed in his face. The governor, without taking offense at his hilarity, breathed like a diver returning to the surface. "Ah, God be praised," he cried. "He is still here. There is much good sense in the saying, songe, mensonge, dream, lie." "In God's name, what's the matter?" demanded Benvenuto. "And what happy circumstance affords me the pleasure of a visit from you at such an hour, Master Giorgio?" "I do not think it," retorted Benvenuto, with a confident smile which caused his host to use strong language. The governor went out, cursing Benvenuto roundly, and the next morning he issued orders that his cell should be inspected every 2 hours, night and day. This rigid inspection was continued for a month. But at the end of that time, as there was no apparent reason to believe that Benvenuto was even thinking of escape, the vigilance of his keepers was somewhat relaxed. Benvenuto, however, had employed the month in accomplishing a terrible task. As we have said, he minutely examined his cell immediately after he was first consigned to it, and from that moment his mind was made up as to the manner of his escape. His window was barred, and the bars were too strong to be removed with a hand or with his modeling tool, the only iron instrument he possessed. The chimney narrowed so toward the top that the prisoner must needs have had the fairy Melusine's power of transforming herself into a serpent to pass through it. The door remained. The door. Let us see how the door was made. It was a heavy oaken door 2 fingers thick, secured by 2 locks and 4 bolts, and sheathed on the inside with iron plates kept in place by nails at the top and bottom. It was through that door that the escape must be effected. Benvenuto had noticed in the corridor, a few steps from the door, the stairway leading to the platform. At intervals of 2 hours, he heard the footsteps of the relieving sentinel going up, then the steps of the other coming down, after which he would hear nothing more for another 2 hours. The question for him to solve, then, was simply this: how to reach the other side of that door, which was secured by 2 locks and 4 bolts, and furthermore sheathed on the inside with iron plates kept in place by nails at the top and bottom. The solution of this problem was the task to which Benvenuto had devoted the month in question. With his modeling tool, which was of iron, he removed, one by one, the heads of all the nails, save 4 above and 4 below, which he left until the last day. Then, in order that his work might not be detected, he replaced the missing heads with exactly similar ones, modeled in clay and covered with iron filings, so that it was impossible for the keenest eye to distinguish the false from the true. As there were, at top and bottom together, some 60 nails, and as it took at least 1 hour, and sometimes 2, to decapitate each nail, the magnitude of the task may be understood. Every evening, when everybody had retired, and nothing could be heard save the footsteps of the sentinel walking back and forth over his head, he built a great fire on the hearth, and piled glowing embers against the iron plates on his door. The iron became red-hot, and gradually transformed to charcoal the wood upon which it was applied, but no indication of the carbonizing process appeared on the other side of the door. For a whole month Benvenuto devoted himself to this task, as we have said, but at the end of the month it was finished, and he only awaited a favorable opportunity to make his escape. He was compelled, however, to wait a few days, for the moon was near the full when the work was done. There was nothing more to be done to the nails, so Benvenuto continued to char the door and drive the governor to desperation. That very day the functionary entered his cell more preoccupied than ever. "My dear prisoner," said the worthy man, whose mind constantly recurred to his fixed idea, "do you still propose to fly away? Come, tell me frankly." "More than ever, my dear host," replied Benvenuto. "Look you," said the governor, "you may say what you choose, but upon my word, I believe it's impossible." "Impossible, Master Giorgio, impossible," rejoined the artist. "Why, you know full well that word does not exist for me, who have always exerted myself to do those things which are the most impossible for other men, and that with success." "Impossible, my dear host. Why, have I not sometimes amused myself by making nature jealous, by fashioning with gold and emeralds and diamonds a flower fairer far than all the flowers of the dew and pearls? Think you that he who can make flowers cannot make wings?" "May God help me," said the governor. "With your insolent assurance you'll make me lose my wits. But tell me, in order that these wings may sustain your weight in the air, a thing which seems impossible to me, I confess, what form shall you give them?" "I have thought deeply thereupon, as you may well imagine, since my safety depends entirely upon the shape of my wings." "With what result?" "After examining all flying things, I have concluded that, if I wish to reproduce by art what they have received from God, I can copy the bat most successfully." "But when all is said, Benvenuto," continued the governor, "even if you had the materials with which to make a pair of wings, would not your courage fail you when the time came to use them? Give me what I need for their construction, my dear governor, and I'll reply by flying away." "What do you need, in God's name?" "Oh, mon Dieu, Almost nothing. A little forge, an anvil, files, tongs, and pincers to make the springs, and 20 yards of oiled silk for the membranes. Good. Very good, said Master Giorgio. That reassures me somewhat, for, clever as you may be, you never will succeed in obtaining all those things here. Tea is done, rejoined Benvenuto. The governor leaped from his chair, but he instantly reflected that it was a material impossibility. And yet, for all that, his poor brain had not a moment's respite. Every bird that flew by his window he imagined to be Benvenuto Cellini. So great is the influence of a mastermind over one of moderate capacity. The same day, Master Giorgio sent for the most skillful machinist in all Rome and ordered him to measure him for a pair of bat's wings. The machinist stared at the governor in blank amazement, without replying, thinking, with some reason, that Master Giorgio had gone mad. But as Master Giorgio insisted, as Master Giorgio was wealthy, and as Master Giorgio had the wherewithal to pay for insane freaks, if he chose to indulge in them, the machinist set about the task, and a week later brought him a pair of magnificent wings, fitted to an iron waist to be worn upon the body, and worked by means of an extremely ingenious arrangement of springs, with most encouraging regularity. Master Giorgio paid his man the stipulated price, measured the space required to accommodate the apparatus, went up to Benvenuto's cell, and without a word overturned everything therein, looking under the bed, peering up the chimney, fumbling in the mattress, and leaving not the smallest corner unvisited. Then he went out, still without speaking, convinced that, unless Benvenuto was a sorcerer, no pair of wings similar to his own could be hidden in his cell. It was clear that the unhappy governor's brain was becoming more and more disordered. Upon descending to his own quarters, Master Giorgio found the machinist waiting for him. He had returned to call his attention to the fact that there was an iron ring at the end of each wing, intended to support the legs of a man flying in a horizontal position. The machinist had no sooner left him than Master Giorgio locked himself in, donned the iron waist, unfolded his wings, hung up his legs, and, lying flat upon his stomach, made his first attempt at flying. But, try as he would, he could not succeed in rising above the floor. After 2 or 3 trials, always with the same result, he sent for the mechanic once more. "Master," said he, "I have tried your wings, but they won't work." "How did you try them?" "I am not surprised. As you lay on the floor, you hadn't a sufficient quantity of air under your wings. You must go to the top of the castle of St. Angelo and boldly launch yourself into space. And you think that in that way I can fly? I am sure of it. If you are so sure of it, would it not be as well to make the experiment yourself?" "The wings are proportioned to the weight of your body and not of mine," replied the machinist. "Wings to carry my weight would need to measure 1.5 feet more from tip to tip." And with that he bowed and took his leave. "The devil!" exclaimed Master Giorgio. Throughout that day, Master Giorgio indulged in various vagaries, which tended to prove that his reason, like Roland's, was penetrating farther and farther into imaginary realms. In the evening, just at bedtime, he summoned all the servants, all the jailers, all the guards. "If," said he, "you learn that Benvenuto Cellini is intending to fly away, let him go, and notify me, nothing more, for I shall know where to go to capture him, even in the dark, since I myself a veritable bat, while he, whatever he may say, is only a false bat." The poor governor was quite mad, but as they hoped that a night's rest would have a soothing effect upon him, they decided to wait until morning before advising the Pope. Moreover, it was an abominable night, dark and rainy, and no one cared to go out in such weather, always excepting Benvenuto Cellini, who had selected that very night for his escape, in a spirit of contrariety doubtless. And so, as soon as he heard the clock strike 10, and the footsteps indicating that the sentinel had been relieved, he fell on his knees and offered a fervent prayer, after which he set to work. In the first place, he removed the heads of the 4 nails, which alone held the iron plates in place. The last yielded to his efforts just at midnight. He heard the steps of the sentinel going up to the platform. He stood with his ear glued to the door, without breathing, until the relieved sentinel came down. The steps died away in the distance, and silence reigned once more. The rain fell with redoubled force, and Benvenuto's heart leaped for joy as he heard it heating against the window. He at once tried to remove the iron plates. As there was nothing to hold them, they yielded to his efforts, and he placed them, one by one, against the wall. He then lay flat upon the floor and attacked the bottom of the door with his modeling tool, sharpened like a dagger, and fitted to a wooden handle. The oak was entirely changed to carbon and gave way at the first touch. In an instant, Benvenuto had made an aperture at the bottom of the door sufficiently large to allow him to crawl through it. He reopened the belly of his statue, took out the strips of linen, coiled them around his waist like a girdle, armed himself with his modeling tool, of which he had, as we have said, made a dagger, and fell on his knees once more and prayed. Then he passed his head through the hole, then his shoulders, then the rest of his body, and found himself in the corridor. He stood erect, but his legs trembled so that he was compelled to lean against the wall for support. His heart was beating as if it would burst, and his head was on fire. A drop of perspiration trembled at the end of each hair, and he clutched the handle of his dagger in his hand, as if someone were trying to tear it away from him. However, as everything was quiet, as nothing was stirring and not a sound was to be heard, Benvenuto soon recovered himself, and felt his way along the wall of the corridor with his hand, until the wall came to an end. Then he put out his foot and felt the first step of the staircase, or, more properly speaking, the ladder which led to the platform. He mounted the rungs, one by one, shivering as the wood creaked under his feet, until he felt a breath of air. Then the rain beat against his fair ear as his head rose above the level of the platform, and as he had been in most intense darkness for a quarter of an hour, he was able to judge at once what reason he had to fear or hope. The balance seemed to incline toward hope. The sentinel had taken refuge from the storm in his sentry box. How? As the sentinels who mounted guard upon the castle of St. Angelo were stationed there, not to inspect the platform, but to look down into the moat and survey the surrounding country, the closed side of the sentry box faced the top of the ladder by which Benvenuto ascended. The artist crept cautiously on his hands and knees toward that part of the platform which was farthest removed from the sentry box. They securely fastened one end of his improvised rope to a jutting projection some 6 inches in length, and then knelt for the third time. "O Lord," he muttered, "O Lord, do thou help me, since I am seeking to help myself." With that prayer upon his lips, he let himself down by his hands, heedless of the bruises upon his knees and his forehead, which, from time to time, rubbed against the face of the wall, and at last reached the solid earth. When he felt the ground beneath his feet, his breast swelled with an infinitude of joy and pride. He contemplated the immense height from which he had descended, and could not avoid saying in an undertone, "Free at last." But his joy was short-lived. As he turned away from the tower, his knees trembled under him. Directly in front of him rose a wall recently built, and of which he knew nothing. He was lost. Everything seemed to give way within him, and in his despair he fell to the ground. But as he fell, his foot struck against something hard. It was a long beam. He gave a slight exclamation of surprise and delight. He was saved. Ah! No one knows what heart-rending alternations of joy and hope one short minute of life can contain. Benvenuto sees a beam as a shipwrecked sailor seizes a spar which may save him from drowning. Under ordinary circumstances, 2 strong men would have found difficulty in lifting it. He dragged it to the wall and stood it on end against it. Then he climbed to the top of the wall, clinging to the beam with his hands and knees. But when he arrived there, his strength was insufficient to raise the beam and lower it on the other side. For a moment his head swam. He closed his eyes, and it seemed as if he was struggling in a lake of flames. Suddenly he remembered his strips of linen, by means of which he had descended from the platform. He slid down the beam to the ground once more, and ran to the spot where he had left them hanging, but he had fastened them so securely at the opposite end that he could not detach them. In his desperation, he raised himself from the ground by hanging to them, pulling with all his strength and hoping to break them. Fortunately, one of the knots slipped at last, and Benvenuto fell to the ground, grasping a fragment some 12 feet long. This was all that he needed. He rose with a bound, and, filled with fresh vigor, climbed up to the top of the wall once more, fastened the cord to the end of the beam, and slid down on the other side. When he reached the end of the cord, he felt in vain for the ground with his feet, and, Upon looking over his shoulder, saw that it was still some 6 feet away. He let go the cord and dropped. He lay still for an instant. He was completely exhausted, and there was no skin left upon his legs and hands. For some moments he gazed stupidly at his bleeding flesh, but 5 o'clock struck, and he saw that the stars were beginning to pale. He rose. But as he rose, a sentinel whom he had not noticed, but who had undoubtedly witnessed his performance, walked toward him. Benvenuto saw that he was lost, and that he must either kill or be killed. He drew his modeling tool from his belt and marched straight toward the guard, with such a determined expression that worthy doubtless realized that he had not only a powerful man, but a deathly despair to contend with. Benvenuto was determined not to give ground, but suddenly the soldier turned his back upon him as if he had not seen him. The prisoner understood what that meant. He ran to the last rampart and found himself some 12 or 15 feet above the moat. Such a trifle was not likely to stop a man like Benvenuto Cellini in his present predicament, when he had left part of his cord hanging from the top of the tower and the other part attached to the beam, so that he had nothing left with which to lower himself, and there was no time to lose. He hung by his hands from a ring in the masonry, and, with a mental prayer, let himself drop. This time he fainted outright. An hour passed before he came to himself, but the coolness which is always noticeable in the air as dawn approaches revived him. He lay for an instant with his mind in confusion, then passed his hand over his forehead and remembered everything. He felt a sharp pain in his head, and saw blood upon the stones where he lay, which had trickled down from his face. He put his hand to his forehead a second time, not to collect his thoughts, but to investigate his wounds, which he found were but skin deep. He smiled and tried to stand up, but fell heavily back. His right leg was broken 3 inches above the ankle. The leg was so benumbed that at first he felt no pain. He at once removed his shirt and tore it into strips, then put the ends of the bone together as well as he could, and applied the bandage, binding it with all his strength, and passing it under the sole of his foot now and then, in order to keep the bones in place. Then he dragged himself on all fours toward one of the city gates, which was within 500 yards. After half an hour of atrocious suffering, he reached the gate only to find that it was closed. But he noticed a large stone under the gate, which yielded to his first attempt to remove it, and he passed through the hole left by it. He had not taken 20 steps beyond the gate when he was attacked by a pack of famished dogs, who were attracted by the odor of blood. He drew his modeling tool and dispatched the largest and most savage with a blow in the side. The others immediately threw themselves upon their defunct comrade and devoured him. Benvenuto dragged himself along to the church of La Transpentina, where he fell in with a water carrier who had just filled his jars and loaded his donkey. He called him. "Look you," he said, "I was with my mistress. Circumstances compelled me, although I went in at the door, to come out through the window. I leaped from the first floor and broke my leg. Carry me to the steps of St. Peter's, and I will give you a golden crown." The water carrier, without a word, took the wounded man on his shoulder and carried him to the designated spot. Having received his pay, he went his way without so much as looking behind. Thereupon Benvenuto, still on all fours, made his way to the palace of Monseigneur de Montluc, the French ambassador, who lived only a few steps away. Monseigneur de Montluc exerted himself so zealously in his behalf that at the end of a month Benvenuto was cured, at the end of 2 months he was pardoned, and at the end of 4 months he started for France with Ascanio and Pagolo. The poor governor, who had gone mad, lived and died a madman, constantly imagining that he was a bat, and making the most violent efforts to fly. Chapter 4, Scotzone. When Benvenuto Cellini arrived in France, Francois was at the chateau of Fontainebleau with his whole court. The artist stopped in the town, sending word of his arrival to the Cardinal of Ferrara. The cardinal, who knew that the king was impatiently awaiting his coming, at once transmitted the intelligence to his majesty. Benvenuto was received by the king the same day. "Benvenuto," he said, addressing him in that mellifluous and expressive tongue in which the artist wrote so well, "for a few days, while you are recovering from your fatigue and vexation, repose, enjoy yourself, make merry, and meanwhile we will reflect and determine upon some noble work for you to execute." Thereupon he ordered apartments in the chateau to be made ready for the artist, and that he should want for nothing. Thus Benvenuto found himself at the outset installed in the very center of French civilization, at that time behind that of Italy, with which it was already struggling for supremacy, and which it was soon to surpass. As he looked around, he could easily believe that he had never left the Tuscan capital, for he found himself in the midst of the arts and artists he had known at Florence. Primaticcio had succeeded Leonardo da Vinci and Rosso. It was for Benvenuto, therefore, to show himself not unworthy of these illustrious predecessors, and to carry the art of statuary as high in the eyes of the most gallant court of Europe as those three great masters had carried the art of painting. And so Benvenuto determined to anticipate the king's wishes by not waiting for him to command the noble work promised, and executed himself of his own motion and with his own resources. He had readily discovered the king's affection for the royal residence where he had met him, and determined to flatter his preference by executing a statue to be called the Nymph of Fontainebleau. A lovely work to undertake was his statue, crowned at once with oak and wheat ears and vines. For Fontainebleau is partly field, partly forest, and partly vineyard. The nymph of whom Benvenuto dreamed must therefore be reminiscent of Ceres and Diana in Aragon, three types of marvelous beauty melted into one, and which, by retaining their distinctive characteristics, should still form but a single whole. Then there should be represented upon the pedestal the attributes of those three goddesses, and they who have seen the fascinating figures about the statue of Perseus know the Florentine master's method of executing those marvelous details. But it was his misfortune that, although he had in his own mind his ideal of beauty, he was sadly in need of a human model for the material part of his work. Where was he to find this model, in whose single person could be found the threefold beauty of three goddesses? Certain it is that if, as in the olden days, the days of Apelles and Phidias, the beauties of the day, those queens of loveliness, had come of their own accord to pose to Benvenuto, he would have found what he sought within the precincts of the court. For there was a whole Olympus in the flower of youth and beauty. There were Catherine de Medicis, then but 21, Marguerite de Valois, Queen of Navarre, who was called the fourth Grace and the 10th Muse, and lastly, Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes, whom we shall meet frequently in the course of this narrative, and who was known as the loveliest of blue stockings and the most learned of beauties. In this galaxy, the artist could have found more than he needed, but the days of Apelles and Phidias had long gone by, and he must look elsewhere. It was with great pleasure, therefore, that he learned that the court was about to set out for Paris. Unfortunately, as Benvenuto himself says, the court in those days traveled like a funeral procession, preceded by 12 to 15,000 horse, halting for the night in some place where there were no more than 2 or 3 houses, wasting 4 hours every evening in pitching the tents, and 4 hours every morning in striking them. In this way, although the distance was but 16 leagues, 5 days were spent in the journey from Fontainebleau to Paris. 20 times on the way Benvenuto was tempted to push forward, but as often the Cardinal of Ferrara dissuaded him, saying that, if the king was compelled to pass a single day without seeing him, he would certainly ask what had become of him, and when he learned that he had left the procession would look upon his unceremonious departure as a failure of respect toward himself. So Benvenuto chafed at his bit, and tried to kill time during the long halt by sketching his nymph of Fontainebleau. A word, in passing, as to Primaticcio. Illinois Signor Francesco Primaticcio, who was commonly called at this time La Bologna, from his birthplace, had studied under Jules Romain for 6 years, and had lived 8 years in France, where the Francois had summoned him upon the advice of the Marquis of Mantua, his great purveyor of artists. He was, as anyone may see at Fontainebleau, a man of prodigious fecundity, with a broad, florid manner, and irreproachable regularity of outline. For a long time Primaticcio, with his encyclopedic brain, his vast store of knowledge, and his boundless talent, which embraced all varieties of painting, for a long time, we say, he was despised, but in our day he has been avenged for 3 centuries of injustice. Under the inspiration of religious ardor, he painted the pictures in the chapel of Beauregard. In moral subjects, he personified the principal Christian virtues at the Hotel Montmorency, and the immensity of Fontainebleau was filled to overflowing with his works. At the Golden Gate and in the Salle du Bal, he treated the most graceful subjects of mythology and allegory, In the gallery of Ulysses and the chamber of St. Louis, he was an epic poet with Homer, and translated with his brush the Odyssey and a portion of the Iliad. Then he passed from the age of fable to heroic times, and historical subjects became his study. The principal incidents in the life of Alexander and Romulus, and the surrender of Havre, were reproduced in the painting with which he decorated the Grand Gallery and the apartment adjoining the Salle du Bal. He turned his attention to the beauties of nature in the great landscapes of the Cabinet of Curiosities. In short, if we care to take the measurement of his eminent talent, to consider the various forms in which it found expression, and to reckon up its work, we shall find that in 98 large pictures and 130 smaller ones he has treated, one after another, landscapes, marine views, historical, allegorical, and religious subjects, portraits, and the themes of epic poetry. He was, as may be seen, a man likely to appreciate Benvenuto, and so, as soon as Benvenuto arrived at Paris, he ran to Primatici with open arms, and was welcomed by him in the same temper. After the first serious conversation between the two friends meeting thus in a foreign land, Benvenuto opened his portfolio, imparted all his ideas to Primatici, showed him all his sketches, and asked him if there was any one of the models he was accustomed to use who fulfilled the necessary conditions. France was in those days, as it is today, the land of grace and prettiness and coquetry, but in vain would one have sought in the domain of the Valois that imperious loveliness which inspired the genius of Michelangelo and Raphael, of John of Bologna and Andrea del Sarto, on the banks of the Tiber and the Arno. To be sure, if the painter or sculptor had been at liberty to choose a model at will among the aristocracy, he would soon have found the types he sought. But like those shades which are detained on the side of the Styx, he was perforce content to see those noble, lovely forms, the constant objects of his artistic aspirations, pass over into the Elysian fields which he was forbidden to enter. It turned out as Primatici anticipated. Benvenuto passed in review his whole army of models, and saw not one who seemed to combine all the qualities essential for the work of which he was dreaming. Thereupon he caused all the Venuses of the crown, the sitting whose names were furnished him, to be summoned to the Cardinal of Ferrara's palace, where he was installed, but none of them fulfilled his expectations. Benvenuto was almost at his wits' end when, one evening, as he was returning home alone along Rue des Petits Champs, after supping with 3 compatriots whom he had met at Paris, namely Pietro Strozzi, the Count of Anguillara, his brother-in-law, and Gelato Pico, nephew of the famous Pico della Mirandola, he noticed a graceful, lovely girl walking in front of him. Benvenuto fairly leaped for joy. The girl was, of all whom he had thus far seen, by far the best qualified to give shape to his dream. He followed her. Therefore, she walked along by the church of St. Honor, and turned into Rue du Pelican. There she looked around to see if she was still followed, and, seeing Benvenuto within a few steps, hastily opened the door and disappeared. Benvenuto went to the same door and opened it in time to see the skirt of the young woman's dress disappear at a bend in the stairway, which was lighted by a smoking lamp. He went up to the first floor. A chamber door stood ajar, and in the chamber he discovered the girl he had followed. Without explaining the artistic motive of his intrusion, indeed, without saying a word, Benvenuto, desirous to ascertain whether the outlines of a body corresponded with those of a face, walked around and around the poor, bewildered girl, as he might have done had she been a statue, taking her arms and raising them above her head in the attitude which he proposed that his nymph of Fontainebleau should assume, and she obeyed his gestures mechanically. There was little of Ceres and the model now before his eyes, and still less of Diana, but very much of Aragon. The master thereupon made up his mind, in view of the manifest impossibility of finding the 3 types united in one person, to be satisfied with the Bacchante. But for the Bacchante he had certainly found all that he desired: sparkling eyes, coral lips, teeth like pearls, graceful neck, well-rounded shoulders, and broad hips, and in the slender wrists and ankles and the long nails there was a suggestion of aristocratic blood, which removed the artist's last hesitation. "What is your name, mademoiselle?" Benvenuto, with his foreign accent, at last asked the poor girl, whose wonder momentarily increased. "Catherine, monsieur, at your service," she replied. "Very good. Here is a golden crown, Mademoiselle Catherine. for the trouble I have caused you. Come to me tomorrow at the Cardinal of Ferrara's Hotel on Rue St. Martin, and I will give you as much more for the same service." The girl hesitated an instant, thinking that he was making sport of her. But the gold crown seemed to prove that he was speaking seriously, and after a very brief pause, she said, "At what time?" 10 o'clock in the morning. Does that suit your convenience?" "Perfectly, so that I may rely upon you." "I will come." Benvenuto saluted her as he would have saluted a duchess, and returned home with a glad heart. He at once burned all his idealistic sketches, and set to work upon one based upon flesh and blood. Having completed the drawing, he placed a quantity of wax upon a pedestal, and beneath his dexterous touch it instantly assumed the shape of the nymph of whom he had dreamed, so that when Catherine appeared at the door of his studio the next morning, a part of his task was already done. As we have said, Catherine utterly failed to understand Benvenuto's motives. She was vastly astonished, therefore, when, having closed the door behind her, he showed her the statue already begun and explained why he had asked her to come. Catherine was a light-hearted, joyous creature, and laughed heartily at her mistake. Her bosom swelled with pride at the thought of posing as a model for a goddess to be presented to a king, so she removed her clothing, and of her own motion assumed the pose indicated by the statue, so gracefully, and withal so exactly, that the artist, when he turned and saw her pose so naturally and well, exclaimed in delight. Benvenuto at once set to work. His was, as we have said, one of those noble, vigorous, artistic natures in which inspiration is aroused by the work beneath their hands, and which seem to become illumined as their work proceeds. He had thrown aside his doublet, and as he went back and forth from the model to the copy, from nature to art, he seemed, with his bare neck and arms, like Jupiter, ready to kindle everything that he touched into flame. Catherine, accustomed to the commonplace or worn-out organization of the young men of the lower classes with whom she had associated, or the young nobleman whose plaything she had been, gazed at this man with the inspired glance, quickened respiration, and swelling breast, with an unfamiliar sensation of wonder. She seemed herself to rise to the master's level. Her eyes shone, and the artist's inspiration was communicated to the model. The sitting lasted 2 hours. At the end of that time, Benvenuto gave Catherine her gold crown, and took leave of her as ceremoniously as before, making an appointment for the following day at the same hour. Catherine returned to her own room, and did not go out during the day. The next morning she was at the studio 10 minutes before the appointed time. The same scene was repeated. On that day, as on the day before, Benvenuto's inspiration rose to sublime heights. Beneath his hand, as beneath that of Prometheus, the clay seemed to breathe. The Bacchante's head was already modeled, and seemed a living head set upon a shapeless trunk. Catherine smiled upon the celestial sister, fashioned in her image. She had never been so happy, and, strangely enough, she was unable to explain the sentiment which caused her happiness. On the following day, the master and the model met again at the same hour, but Catherine was conscious of a sensation absent on the preceding days, which caused the blood to rush to her face as soon as she began to disrobe. The poor child was beginning to love, and love brought modesty in its train. On the 4th day it was still worse, and Benvenuto was compelled several times to remind her that he was not modeling the Venus de Medicis, but Erigone, drunken with debauchery and wine. Moreover, her patience would be tried but a little longer, 2 days more, and the model services would be no longer required. In the afternoon of the 2nd day, Benvenuto, having given the last touch to his statue, thanked Catherine for her complaisance, and gave her 4 gold crowns, but Catherine let them fall to the floor. The poor child's dream was ended. From that moment she must return to her former condition, and that condition had become hateful to her since the day that she entered the master's studio. Benvenuto, who had no suspicion of what was taking place in the girl's heart, picked up the 4 crowns, handed them to her once more, pressing her hand as he did so, and said to her that, if he ever could be of service to her, she must apply to no one but him. Then he passed into the apartment where his apprentices were at work, seeking Ascanio, to whom he wished to exhibit his completed statue. Catherine kissed the tools the master had used, one after another, and went away, weeping. The next morning Catherine appeared at the studio while Benvenuto was alone, and when he, astonished to see her again, ask her why she had come. She knelt at his feet and asked him if he did not need a servant. Benvenuto had an artist's heart, quick to detect feeling in another. He divined what was taking place in the poor child's heart, and raised her from the floor, kissing her upon the forehead as he did so. From that moment Catherine was a part of the studio, which, as we have said, she brightened and made cheerful with her childish ways, and enlivened by her unceasing activity. She had become almost indispensable to everybody, above all to Benvenuto. She it was who superintended and managed everything, scolding and caressing Ruperta, who was dismayed at her first appearance in the household, but ended by loving her as everybody else did. The Aragon lost nothing by this arrangement. Having the model always at hand, Benvenuto had retouched and perfected it with greater care than he had ever before bestowed upon one of his statues, and had then carried it to Francois I, whose admiration knew no bounds, and who ordered him to execute it in silver. He subsequently conversed for a long time with the goldsmith, asked him if he was pleased with his studio, where it was situated, and whether there were beautiful things to be seen there. And when he dismissed him, he determined in his own mind to take him by surprise some morning, but said nothing to him of his intention. Thus did matters stand when this history opens, Benvenuto working, Catherine singing, Ascanio dreaming, and Pagolo praying. On the day following that on which Ascanio returned home so late, thanks to his excursion in the neighborhood of the Hotel de Nesle, there was a loud knocking at the street door. Dame Ruperta at once rose to answer the summons, but Scotzone, the reader will remember that this was a name given to Catherine by Benvenuto, was already out of the room. A moment later they heard her voice, half joyous, half terrified, crying, "O mon Dieu, Master, mon Dieu, it is the king. The king in person has come to see your studio." And poor Scotzone, leaving all the doors open behind her, reappeared, pale and trembling, on the threshold of the workshop where Benvenuto was at work, surrounded by his pupils and apprentices. Chapter 5: Genius and Royalty. In very truth, Francois I was entering the courtyard with all his retinue. He led by the hand the Duchesse d'Etampes. The King of Navarre followed with the Dauphine, Catherine de Medicis. The Dauphin, afterwards Henri II, came next with his aunt, Marguerite de Valois, Queen of Navarre. Almost all the nobility accompanied them. Benvenuto went to meet them, without confusion or embarrassment, and welcomed the king, princes, great lords, and beautiful women as a friend welcomes friends. And yet there were in the throng the most illustrious names of France, and the most resplendent beauties in the world. Marguerite charmed, Madame d'Etampes entranced, Catherine de Medicis astonished, Diane de Poitiers dazzled. But Benvenuto was familiar with the purest types of antiquity and of the 16th century in Italy, even as a beloved pupil of Michelangelo was accustomed to the society of kings. "You must needs permit us, madam, to admire by your side the marvels we are to behold," said Francois to the Duchesse d'Etampes, who replied with a smile. And de Pisseleu, Duchesse d'Etampes, who since the king's return from his captivity in Spain had succeeded the Comtesse de Chebriand in his favor, was at this time in all the splendor of a truly royal loveliness. Her figure was erect and graceful, and she carried her charming head with a dignity and feline grace which recalled at once the cat and panther, which she also resembled in her habit of pouncing upon one unexpectedly, and in her murderous appetites. With all this, the royal courtesan was very clever at assuming an air of sincerity and candor which would disarm the most suspicious. Nothing could be more mobile or more treacherous than the features of this pale-lipped woman, today Hermione, tomorrow Galatea, with a smile, sometimes cajoling, sometimes terrible, her glance, at one moment caressing and suggestive, and the next flaming with wrath. She had a habit of raising her eyelids so slowly that one could never tell whether they would disclose a languorous or threatening expression. Haughty and imperious, she subjugated Francois I by holding his passions enthralled. Proud and jealous, she insisted that he should call upon the Comtesse de Chebriand to return the jewels he had given her. By returning them in the form of bullion, the lovely and melancholy Countess did at least protest against the profanation. Supple and deceitful, she had closed her eyes more than once when the king's capricious fancy seemed to distinguish some charming young woman at court, whom, however, he invariably abandoned very soon to return to his beautiful enchantress. "I was in haste to see you," Benvenuto, for 2 months have now passed since your coming to our realm, and vexatious affairs of state have since that time forbade my turning my thoughts to things artistic. Impute it to my brother and cousin, the emperor, who gives me not a moment of repose. If it is your will, sire, I will write to him, and pray that he will give you time to be a great friend to art, since you have proved to him ere this that you are a mighty captain. Pray, do you know Charles V? Inquired the King of Navarre. 4 years since, sire, I had the honor, being then at Rome, to present a missal of my making to his sacred majesty, and make a speech to him which seemed to touch him nearly. What said his sacred majesty to you? He said that he already knew me from having seen upon the Pope's cope, 3 years before, a carved stud which did me honor. Sire, 'tis true that I have had the fortune to please many cardinals, grand dukes, princes, and kings. Prithee, show me your beautiful designs, that I may see if I shall not be a harder judge to please than others. Sire, I had very little time. However, here are a vase and silver basin which I have commenced, and which are perhaps not too unworthy of your majesty's attention. The king examined the 2 works of art for 5 minutes without a word. It seemed that the handiwork made him forget the workman. At last, as the ladies gathered curiously about him, he spoke. See, mesdames, he cried, what marvelous workmanship. Observe the hold and novel shape of this vase. What ingenuity and marvelous modeling in the bas-reliefs and bosses. Mon Dieu, especially do I admire the beauty of the lines, and see how true to life and how diverse are the attitudes of the figures. Look at the one holding her arms over her head. The fugitive gesture is so naturally seized that one wonders that she doesn't continue the movement. In very truth, I believe that the ancients never did anything so fine. I remember the best works of antiquity, and those of the most eminent artists of Italy, but nothing ever made so deep an impression upon me as this. O Madame de Navarre, I pray you look at this pretty child lost among the flowers, and waving her little foot in the air. How graceful and pretty and instinct with life it all is. Others have complimented me, great king, cried Benvenuto, but you understand me. Have you aught else? Asked the king, greedily. Here is a medallion representing Leda and her swan, made for Cardinal Gabriel Cesarini, and here a seal cut in intaglio, representing St. John and St. Ambrose. This is a reliquary, enameled by myself. Do you strike metals? Interposed Madame d'Etampes. As Cavadone of Milan did, Madame. And you work in enamel, said Marguerite, like Amerigo of Florence. And you engrave seals, inquired Catherine, like Lantisco of Piraeus. Pray, did you think, Madame, that my talent is confined to the production of tiny golden toys and great silver pieces? I can do a little of everything. God be praised. I am a possible military engineer, and I have twice prevented the capture of Rome. I can turn a sonnet prettily, and your majesty has but to order me to compose a poem, provided that it be in praise of yourself, and I will undertake to execute it neither better nor worse than if my name were Clement Marot. As to music, which my father taught me with a stick, I found the method an admirable one, and I am so good a performer on the flute and cornet that Clement VII employed me among his musicians at the age of 24. Furthermore, I discovered the secret of compounding an excellent powder, and I can also make beautiful carbines and surgical instruments. If your majesty is at war and chooses to employ me as man-at-arms, you will find that I am not to be despised in that capacity, and that I know as well how to handle an arquebus as to sight a culverin. As a hunter, I have brought down my 25 peacocks in a day, and as an artillerist, I have freed the emperor from a Prince of Orange, and your majesty from a Connétable de Bourbon. Traitors seem not to be fortunate when they encounter me. Of which exploit are you the prouder? The young Dauphin interrupted. Of having killed the constable or the 25 peacocks? I am proud of neither, Monseigneur. Like all other gifts, address is God-given, and I simply use my address. By my faith, I was ignorant that you had already rendered me so great a service, said the king, a service which, however, my sister Marguerite will be at great pains to pardon you. Was it indeed you who slew the Connétable de Bourbon? Prithee, how came it to pass? I learned afterward that it was he who towered above his companions. While Benvenuto was relating this incident with a most indifferent air, the circle of lords and ladies of which he was the center spread out somewhat, and they all gazed with respect and almost with terror at this unconscious hero. Francois I alone remained at his side. "And so, my dear fellow," he said, "I see that you loaned me your gallantry before consecrating your genius to me." "Sire," Benvenuto rejoined with a smile, "I believe, in good sooth, that I was born to be your servitor. An incident of my early youth has always seemed to me to admit of no other interpretation. Your crest is a salamander, is it not?" "Yes, with this device, nutrisco et extinguo. No human being has ever seen the animal save thou. Was not that a premonition of fate, sire? Indeed, I think I was predestined to do as I have done, for at the age of 20 I was about to set out for England, when the sculptor Pietro Torrigiano, who was to take me thither, told me that in his youth he one day struck our Michelangelo in the face, on the occasion of some studio quarrel. I abandoned all thought of the journey then. Not for a prince's title would I have traveled with one who had raised his hand against my great sculptor. I remained in Italy, and from Italy, instead of going to England, I came to France. France, proud of your choice, Benvenuto, will see to it that you do not sigh for your fatherland. Oh, my fatherland is out, and my prince he who commands the richest cup at my hands. Have you any beautiful work now in contemplation? Cellini. Oh, yes, sire, a Christ, not a Christ upon the cross, but Christ in his radiance and glory, and I shall copy as closely as possible the infinite beauty of the guise in which he revealed himself to me. What? Laughed Marguerite, the skeptic. In addition to all the kings of earth, have you seen the King of heaven, too? Yes, madam, replied Benvenuto, with childlike simplicity. Oh, pray tell us of that, said the Queen of Navarre. Willingly, madam, said Benvenuto, with a confident air, which implied that it did not occur to him that anyone could doubt any part of his story. Some time before, he continued, I had seen Satan and all his legions, whom a necromancing friend of mine, a priest, evoked for me at the Colosseum. Indeed, we had much ado to rid ourselves of them. But the dread souvenir of those infernal apparitions was forever banished from my mind when, in answer to my fervent prayer, the blessed Savior of mankind appeared to me in a flood of sunlight, crowned with glory, and brought sweet consolation to me in the misery of my captivity. And are you sure beyond a peradventure, demanded the Queen of Navarre, so sure that you have no shadow of doubt that Christ really appeared to you? I have no doubt of it, madam. In that case, Benvenuto, go on and fashion a Christ for our chapel, said Francois I, with his usual good humor. Sire, if your majesty will so far indulge me, I pray you to order something different, and allow me to postpone the execution of that work. Why so? Because I promise God to undertake it for no other sovereign than him. Allah born here. Be it so. Benvenuto, I need 12 candlesticks for my table. That is a different matter, and therein, sire, you shall be obeyed. It is my wish that they should take the form of 12 silver statues. The effect will be magnificent. Sire, they must represent 6 gods and 6 goddesses, and be of my own height. Why, your order is for a whole epic poem, said the Duchesse d'Etampes. For a work of marvelous, surprising splendor, is it not, Monsieur Benvenuto? I am never surprised, madam. I should be greatly surprised, myself, retorted the Duchess, somewhat piqued, if other sculptors than those of the olden time could carry such a task to completion. I hope, nevertheless, to execute it as satisfactorily as they could have done, rejoined Benvenuto, coolly. I never boast, madam. As he made this reply with perfect calmness, Cellini looked at Madame d'Etampes, and the haughty Duchess lowered her eyes, in spite of herself, under that firm, assured glance, in which there was no trace of irritation. Her resentment was aroused by the consciousness of his superiority, to which he yielded even while resisting it, and without knowing in what it consisted. She had thought hitherto that beauty was the greatest power in the world. She had forgotten genius. "What treasure," said she, with a bitter sneer, "would suffice to recompense such talent as yours?" "None that I can command, faith," rejoined Francois. "And apropos, Benvenuto, I remember that you have as yet received but 500 crowns. Will you be content with the stipend which I allowed my painter, Leonardo da Vinci, 700 gold crowns yearly? I will pay over and above that for all works which you may execute for me. Sire, your offer is worthy such a king as Francois and, I venture to say it, of such an artist as Cellini. And yet I shall make so bold as to prefer a request to your majesty. It is granted in advance, Benvenuto. Sire, I am but ill and narrowly accommodated in this edifice. One of my pupils has discovered a location much more favorably situated than this for the execution of such great works as my king may choose to command. The property in question belongs to your majesty. It is the Grand Nestle. It is at the disposal of the province of Paris, but he does not dwell therein. He occupies only the Petit Nestle, which I will gladly leave in his possession." "So be it, Benvenuto," said Francois. "Take up your abode at the Grand Nestle, and I shall have only to cross the river to talk with you and admire your masterpieces." "Consider, sire," interposed Madame d'Etampes, "that you thereby, for no motive, deprive a nobleman and one devoted to my service of property appertaining to his office." Benvenuto glanced at her, and for the second time and lowered her eyes beneath that steady, piercing gaze. Cellini rejoined, with the same naive good faith with which he had described the supernatural apparitions. "I, too, am of noble birth. Madam, my family descends from a gallant officer who held high rank under Julius Caesar, one Fiorino, of Salino, near Montefiascone, and who gave his name to Florence, while your provost and his ancestors, if my memory serves me, have never given their name to anything. However," continued Benvenuto, turning to Francois, and changing his expression and his tone, "it may be that I have made too hold, it may be that I shall incur the hatred of powerful and influential persons, who, despite your majesty's protection, may prove too strong for me at last. The provost of Paris is said to have something very like an army at his orders. I have been told," the king interrupted, "that on a certain day, at Rome, one Cellini, a goldsmith, retained, in default of payment therefore, a silver vase ordered by Monsieur Fanzy, then cardinal and today pope." "It is true, sire." "Furthermore, that the cardinal's whole household stormed the goldsmith's studio, sword in hand, with the design of carrying away the vase by force." "That, too, is true. But this Cellini, in ambush behind the door, armed with his carbine, did defend himself so valorously that he put Monsignor the Cardinal's people to flight, and was paid by the Cardinal on the following day." "All that, sire, is strictly true." "Very good. Are not you the Cellini in question?" "Yes, sire. Let your majesty but continue to bestow your favor upon me, and nothing has any power to terrify me." "In that case, go straight before you," said the king, smiling in his beard. "Go where you will, since you are of noble blood." Madame d'Etampes said no more, but she registered a mental vow of deadly hatred to Cellini from that moment, the hatred of an offended woman. "One last favor, sire," said Cellini. "I cannot present all my workmen to you. They are 10 in number, some French, some German, all worthy, talented comrades. But here are my 2 pupils whom I brought from Italy with me, Pagolo and Ascanio. Come forward, Pagolo, and raise your head and your eyes a little, not impertinently, but like an honest man who has no evil action to blush for. This good fellow lacks inventive genius, perhaps, sire, and is slightly lacking in earnestness, too, but he is a careful, conscientious artist who works slowly, but well, who comprehends my ideas perfectly and executes them faithfully. And this is Ascanio, my noble-hearted, amiable pupil, and my beloved child. It is doubtless true that he has not the vigorous creative faculty which will represent in a bas-relief the serried ranks of 2 hostile armies meeting in deadly encounter, and tearing each other to pieces, or lions and tigers clinging with claws and teeth to the edge of a vase. Nor has he the original fancy which invents horrible chimeras and impossible dragons. No, but his soul, which resembles his body, has the instinct of a divine ideal, so to speak. Ask him to design an angel or a group of nymphs, and no one can equal the exquisite poesy and grace of his work. With Pagolo I have 4 arms, with Ascanio I have 2 souls, and then he loves me, and I am very happy to have always by my side a pure and devoted heart like his. While his master was speaking, Ascanio stood near him, modestly, but without embarrassment, in an attitude of unstudied grace, and Madame d'Etampes could not remove her eyes from the fascinating young Italian, black-eyed and black-haired, who seemed a living copy of Apollino. If Ascanio, said she, understands grace and beauty so well, and if he cares to come some morning to the Hotel d'Etampes, I will furnish him with precious stones and gold, with which he may cause some marvelous flower to bloom for me. Ascanio bowed and thanked her with a glance. And I, said the king, grant to him, as well as to Pagolo, a yearly pension of 100 crowns. I undertake to make him on their pension, sire, said Benvenuto. But who is the lovely child with the long eyelashes, hiding yonder in the corner, said Francois, spying Scotzone for the first time. Oh, pay no attention to her, sire, replied Benvenuto, with a frown. She is the only one of the beautiful things in this studio whom I like not to have noticed. Aha! You are jealous, my Benvenuto. Mon Dieu, sire, I like not that any hand should be laid upon my property. To compare small things with great, it is as if some others should dare to think of Madame d'Etampes. You would be furious. Sire, Scotzone is my duchess. The duchess, who was gazing at Ascanio, bit her lips at this unceremonious interruption. Many courtiers smiled in spite of themselves, and all the ladies giggled. As for the king, he laughed outright. Foi de Gentilhomme, your jealousy is within its right. Benvenuto, and an artist and a king may well understand each other. Adieu, my friend. I commend my statues to your attention. You will commence with Jupiter, naturally, and when you have finished the model, you will show it to me. Adieu, and good luck. We will meet at the Hotel de Nesle. To bid me show you the model is a simple matter, sire, but how shall I gain entrance to the Louvre? Your name will be given at the gates, with orders to introduce you to my presence. Cellini bowed, and with Pagolo and Ascanio, escorted the king and court to the street. At the door he knelt and kissed the king's hand. Sire, he said with deep feeling, you have heretofore saved me from captivity, perhaps from death, through the intervention of Monseigneur de Montluc. You have overwhelmed me with wealth. You have honored my poor studio with your presence. But far more than all this, sire, is a fact, and I know not how to thank you that it is so, that you so magnificently anticipate all my dreams. We ordinarily work only for a chosen few scattered through the centuries, but I shall have had the signal honor of finding a living judge, always present, always enlightened. Until now I have been only the workman of the future. Permit me henceforth to call myself your Majesty's goldsmith. My workman, my goldsmith, my artist, and my friend, Benvenuto, if the last title seems to you no more deserving of contempt than the others. Adieu, or rather, au revoir. It is needless to say that all the princes and nobles followed the example set by the king, and loaded Cellini with flattery and offers of friendship. When all were gone, and Benvenuto was left alone in the courtyard with his pupils, they thanked him, Ascanio effusively, Pagolo with something very like constraint. Nay, do not thank me, my children, it's not worthwhile. But look you, if you do in truth consider yourselves under any obligation to me, I wish, since the subject of conversation was introduced today, to ask a service at your hands. It relates to something which I have very much at heart. You heard what I said to the king apropos of Catherine, and what I said to him truly expressed the deepest feeling of my heart. The child is necessary to my life, my friends, to my life as an artist, because, as you know, her services as a model are offered so freely and joyously, to my life as a man, because I think that she loves me. I pray you, therefore, although she is beautiful, and although you are young, as she also is, Do not let your thoughts rest upon Catherine. There are enough other lovely girls in the world. Do not tear my heart. Do not insult my affection by casting bold glances upon my Scotsone. Nay, rather watch over her in my absence, and advise her as if you were her brothers. I conjure you, observe my wishes herein, for I know myself and my feeling in this matter, and I swear before God, that if I should discover aught amiss, I would kill her and her accomplice. Master, said Ascanio, I respect you as my master, and I love you as my father. Have no fear. Bless Jesus, cried Pagolo, clasping his hands. May God preserve me from thinking of such an infamous action. Do I not know that I owe everything to you? And would it not be a crime thus to abuse your sacred confidence in me, and to repay your benefactions by such dastardly treachery? Thanks, my friends, said Benvenuto, pressing their hands. I have perfect faith in you, and I am content. Now, Pagolo, return to your work, for I have promised to seal it which you are working to M. de Villeroy for tomorrow, while Ascanio and myself pay a visit to the estate which our gracious king has bestowed upon us, and of which we will take possession on Sunday next, peaceably or by force. Then he turned to Ascanio. Come, Ascanio, said he, let us go and see if this Nestle habitation, which seemed to you so eligible in its external aspect, has internal appointments corresponding to its reputation. Before Ascanio had time to offer any observation, Benvenuto, with a parting glance over the studio to see if every workman was in his place, and a light tap upon Scotsone's plump, rosy cheek, passed his arm through his pupils, drew him toward the door, and went out with him. Chapter 6. To what use a duenna may be put. They had taken hardly 10 steps in the street, when they met a man of some 50 years, rather short of stature, but with a handsome, mobile countenance. I was about to call upon you, Benvenuto, said the new arrival, whom Ascanio saluted with respect, mingled with veneration, and whose hand Benvenuto cordially grasped. Is your business of importance, my dear Francesco, said the goldsmith. In that case, I will return with you, or is it for no other purpose than a friendly call? In that case, come with us. It was to proffer you some friendly advice. Benvenuto. I will gladly listen. Advice is always a good thing to receive when it is proffered by a friend. But that which I have to give you is for no other ear than yours. This youth is another myself, Francesco. Say on. I would already have done so, had I thought that I ought to do it, replied Benvenuto's friend. Pardon, master, said Ascanio, discreetly moving apart. Very well. Go alone with our purpose going with you, dear boy, said Benvenuto. As you know, when you have seen a thing, it is as if I had myself seen it. Look most carefully into every detail. See if the studio will have a good light, if the courtyard will be a convenient place for a furnace, and if it will be possible to separate our workshop from that of the other apprentices. Do not forget the tennis court. With that, Benvenuto passed his arm through the strangers, waved his hand to Ascanio, and returned to the studio, leaving the young man standing in the middle of Rue St. Martin. In very truth, there was in the commission entrusted to him by his master more than enough to embarrass Ascanio. His embarrassment was by no means slight, even when Benvenuto proposed that they should make the visit of inspection in company. Judge, then, what it became when he found himself confronted with the prospect of making it all alone. He had watched Colombe 2 Sundays without daring to follow her, had followed her on the 3rd without daring to accost her, and now he was to present himself at her home. And for what purpose? To examine the Hotel de Nesle, which Benvenuto proposed, by way of pastime, to take from Colombe's father on the following Sunday, willy-nilly. It was a false position for anybody. It was terrible for a lover. Fortunately, it was a long distance from Rue St. Martin to the Hotel de Nesle. Had it been only a step or two, Ascanio would not have taken them. But it was a half-league, so he started. Nothing so familiarizes one with danger as to be separated from it by considerable time or distance. To all strong minds and happy dispositions, reflection is a powerful auxiliary. Ascanio belonged to the latter class. In those days, it was not fashionable to be disgusted with life before one had fairly entered upon it. All the impulses were ingenuous and ingenuously expressed. Joy by laughter, sorrow by tears. Affectation was a thing almost unknown, in life as in out, and a comely youth of 20 was in no wise ashamed in those days to confess that he was happy. But in all Ascanio's embarrassment there was a certain amount of joy. He had not expected to see Colombe again until the following Sunday, and he was to see her that very day. Thus he had gained 6 days, and 6 days of waiting are, as everybody knows, 6 centuries according to a lover's reckoning. And so, as he approached his destination, the affair became more simple in his eyes. He it was, to be sure, who had advised Benvenuto to ask the king for the Hotel de Nesle for his studio. But could Colombe take it ill of him that he had desired to be near her? This installation of the Florentine goldsmith in the old palace of Amara could not, it was true, be carried out without interference with Colombe's father, who looked upon it as his own. But would any real injury be inflicted upon Messiah Robert d'Estourville when he did not occupy it? Moreover, there were 1,000 ways in which Benvenuto could pay for his occupancy: a chaste cup for the provost, a necklace for his daughter, and Ascanio would undertake to make the necklace, might, and undoubtedly would, in that artistic age, make the rough places smooth. Ascanio had seen grand dukes, kings, and popes ready to give their coronets, scepters, or tiaras as a prize of one of the marvelous examples of his master's art. After all, then, supposing that matters should take that course, Messiah Robert would eventually be in Master Benvenuto's debt. For Master Benvenuto was so generous that, if Messiah Robert showed a disposition to be courteous and compliant, Ascanio was certain that he, Master Benvenuto, would deal right royally with him. By the time he reached the end of Rue Saint-Martin, Ascanio looked upon himself as a messenger of peace, chosen by the Lord to maintain harmonious relations between two powers. And yet, notwithstanding that conviction, Ascanio was not sorry, surely lovers are strange creatures, to lengthen his journey by 10 minutes, and instead of crossing the Seine by boat, he walked the whole length of the quays and crossed by the Pont Auxiliary Moulins. It may be that he chose that road because it was the same he had taken the evening before when following Colombe. Whatever his motive for making the detour, he finally found himself in front of the Hotel de Nesle in about 20 minutes. But when he saw the little ogive door that he must pass through, when he saw the turrets of the lovely little Gothic palace boldly raising their heads above the wall, when he thought that behind those jealousies, half closed because of the heat, was his beautiful Colombe, the whole card house of happy dreams which he had built on the road vanished like the structures one sees in the clouds, and which the wind overturns with one blow of its wing. He found himself face to face with reality, and reality did not seem to him the most reassuring thing in the world. However, after a few moments of hesitation which is the harder to understand, in that he was absolutely alone upon the quay in the intense heat, he realized that he must make up his mind to do something. As there was nothing for him to do but find his way into the hotel, he walked to the door and raised the knocker. But God only knows when he would have let it fall, had not the door chanced to open at that moment, bringing him face to face with a sort of master yak, a man about 30 years of age, half servant, half peasant. It was Messiah Robert d'Estourville's gardener. Ascanio and the gardener mutually recoiled a step. "What do you want?" said the gardener. "Whom do you seek?" Ascanio, thus compelled to go forward with his mission, summoned all his courage, and replied bravely, "I desire to inspect the hotel." "To inspect the hotel," cried the gardener in amazement. "In whose name?" "In the king's name." Ascanio replied. "In the king's name," cried the gardener. "Jesus die, does the king intend to take it from us?" "Perhaps so. But what does it mean?" "Pray understand, my friend," said Ascanio, with a self-possession upon which he mentally congratulated himself, "that I have no explanation to give you." "True. With whom do you desire to speak?" "Is Monsieur le Prévôt within?" inquired Ascanio, knowing perfectly well that he was not. "No, monsieur, he is at the Châtelet." "Indeed? Who takes his place in his absence?" "His daughter is here, Mademoiselle Colombe." Ascanio felt that he was blushing to his ease. "And there's Dame Perini, too," the gardener continued. "Does Monsieur desire to speak with Dame Perini or with Mademoiselle Colombe?" This was a very simple question. Surely, and yet it caused a terrible conflict in Ascanio's mind. He opened his mouth to say that he wished to see Mademoiselle Colombe, and yet it was as if the audacious words refused to pass his lips, and he asked for Dame Perini. The gardener, who had no suspicion that his question, which seemed so simple to him, had caused such a disturbance, bowed in token of obedience, and went across the courtyard toward the door of the Petit Nestle. Ascanio followed him. He had to cross a second courtyard, pass through a second door, then cross a small flower garden, ascend a flight of steps, and traverse a long gallery. At the end of the gallery, the gardener opened the door and said, "Dame Perini, here is a young gentleman who asked to inspect the hotel in the king's name." With that, he stood aside and made room for Ascanio, who took his place in the doorway. As he glanced into the room, a cloud passed before his eyes, and he leaned against the door frame for support. A very simple and yet entirely unforeseen thing had happened. Dame Perini was with Colombe, and he found himself in the presence of both. Dame Perini was sitting at the spinning wheel, spinning. Colombe was at work at her embroidery frame. They raised their heads at the same instant and looked toward the door. Colombe instantly recognized Ascanio. She expected him, although her reason told her that he was not likely to come. As for him, when he saw the maiden's eyes raised to his face, although their expression was infinitely soft and sweet, it seemed to him that he was dying. The fact is that he had anticipated 1,000 difficulties, had dreamed of 1,000 obstacles to be surmounted before he could win his way to his beloved. Those obstacles would have aroused all his energy and strengthened his resolution. And lo, everything came about as naturally and simply as if God, touched by the purity of his passion, had smiled upon it and blessed it from the first. He found himself in her presence when he was least expecting it, and of all the beautiful speech he had prepared, the fervent eloquence of which was to amaze and move her, he could not recall a phrase, a word, a syllable. Colombe, for a part, sat motionless and dumb. The two pure-souled young creatures, who, as if they had been already joined in wedlock in heaven, felt that they belonged to one another, and who, when once their lives had brought them close together, would thenceforth form, like Salmacis and Hermaphrodite, but one existence, were terrified at their first meeting, trembled, hesitated, and stood face to face unable to find words. Dame Perini, half rising from her chair and preparing to put aside her spinning, was the first to break the silence. "What did that blockhead Rainbow say?" cried the worthy duenna. "Did you hear, Colombe?" As Colombe did not reply, she continued, walking toward Ascanio. "What is your pleasure here, my young master?" "Why, God forgive me," she suddenly exclaimed, as she recognized the visitor. "It's the gallant youth who so politely handed me the holy water at the church door these last 3 Sundays. What is your pleasure, my handsome friend?" "I would be glad to speak with you," faltered Ascanio. "With me alone?" queried Dame Perini coquettishly. "With you alone?" As he made this reply, Ascanio told himself that he was a consummate ass. "Come this way, then, young man," said Dame Perini, opening a door at the side of the room and signing to Ascanio to follow her. Ascanio did as she bade him, but as he left the room he cast upon Colombe one of those long, eloquent glances wherein lovers can say so much, and which, however unintelligible they may be to indifferent observers, are always understood at last by the person to whom they are addressed. Colombe undoubtedly lost no portion of its meaning, for her eyes, how she knew not, having met the youth's, she blushed prodigiously, and when she felt that she was blushing, she cast her eyes down upon her embroidery, and began to mangle a poor inoffensive flower. Ascanio saw the blush, and, stopping abruptly, stepped toward Colombe. But at that moment Dame Perini turned and called him, and he was compelled to follow her. He had no sooner crossed the threshold of the door than Colombe dropped her needle, let her arms fall beside her chair, threw back her head, and breathed a long sigh, in which were mingled, by one of those inexplicable miracles which the heart alone can perform, regret at Ascanio's departure, and a sort of relief to feel that he was no longer there. The young man was very perceptibly in a bad humor, with Benvenuto, who had given him such a strained commission to fulfill, with himself, for his inability to take advantage of his opportunity. but most of all with Dame Perini, who was cruel enough to make him leave the room just when Colombe's eyes seemed to bid him remain. So it was that, when the duenna inquired as to the purpose of his visit, Ascanio replied in a most deliberate manner, determined to be revenged upon her for his own bungling. "The purpose of my visit, my dear madam, is to beg you to show me the Hotel de Nesle from one end to the other." "Show you the Hotel de Nesle," cried Dame Perini. "Why, in heaven's name, do you desire to see it?" "To see if it will be convenient for us, if we shall be comfortable here, and if it is worthwhile for us to leave our present quarters to come and live here." "What? Come and live here? Pray, have you hired the hotel of Monsieur le Prévôt?" "No, but His Majesty gives it to us." "His Majesty gives it to you!" exclaimed Dame Perini, more and more amazed. "Absolutely," replied Ascanio. "To you?" "Not precisely, my good woman, but to my master." "And who is your master, if I may ask?" "Young man, some great foreign nobleman, no doubt." "Better than that, Dame Perini, a great artist, come hither from Florence, expressly to serve His Most Christian Majesty." "Aha!" said the good woman, who did not understand very well. "What does your master make?" "What does he make? Why, he makes everything. Rings to put on maidens' fingers, years to put upon kings' tables, statues to place in the temples of the gods, and in his leisure moments he besieges or defends cities, as his caprice leads him to cause an emperor to tremble or to reassure a pope." "Jesus die you!" cried Dame Perini. "What is your master's name?" "His name is Benvenuto Cellini." "It's strange that I don't know that name," muttered the duenna. "What is his profession?" "He is a goldsmith." Dame Perini gazed wonderingly at Ascanio. "A goldsmith," she muttered, "a goldsmith. And do you fancy that Monsieur le Prévôt will give up his palace like this to a goldsmith? If he doesn't give it up, we will take it." "By force?" "Even so. But your master will hardly dare to contend against Monsieur le Prévôt, I trust. He has contended against 3 dukes and 2 popes." "Jesus die you! 2 popes. He is not a heretic, surely." "He is as good a Catholic as you and I, Dame Perini. Have no fear on that score. Satan is in no wise our ally. But in default of the devil, we have the king on our side." "So, but Monsieur le Prévôt has a more powerful protector than the king." "Whom has he, pray?" "Madame d'Etampes." "Then we are on equal terms," said Ascanio. "But suppose Messiah d'Estourville refuses?" "Master Benvenuto will take." "And suppose Messiah d'Estourville shuts himself up here in a citadel?" "Master Cellini will lay siege to it." "Consider that the provost has 24 sergeants at arms. Master Benvenuto Cellini has 10 apprentices. Still we are on equal terms, you see, Dame Perini. But Messiah d'Estourville is personally a sturdy fighter. At the tournament which took place at the time of the marriage of Francois, he was one of the challengers, and all those who dared measure swords with him were unhorsed." "Ah well, Dame Perini, then he is just a man for Benvenuto, who has never met his match, and who, like Messiah d'Estourville, always unhorses his adversaries. But there is this difference between them. A fortnight afterward, they who have encountered your provost are on their legs again in good health and spirits, while they who have my master to deal with never raise their heads again, and 3 days after are dead and buried." "Evil will come of this. Evil will come of this," muttered Dame Perini. "Young man, they say that fearful things are done in cities taken by assault." "Have no fear on that head, Dame Perini," rejoined Ascanio with a smile. "You will have to do with generous conquerors." "What I mean, my dear child," said Dame Perini, who was not sorry perhaps to secure a friend among the besiegers, "is that I fear there may be bloodshed. For, so far as your proximity to us is concerned, you will understand that it cannot fail to be very agreeable to us, since society is somewhat scanty in this accursed desert to which Messiah d'Estourville has consigned his daughter and myself, like 2 wretched nuns. Although neither she nor I have taken the vows, thank God. It isn't good for man to be alone. So set Holy Writ, and when Holy Writ mentions man, woman is included. Is not that your opinion, young man? That goes without saying. And we are entirely alone, and therefore very doleful in this vast habitation. Why do you receive no visitors here? Ascanio asked. Jesus die you. It's worse than if we were nuns. As I told you, nuns have parents at least, and friends who come and talk to them through the grating. They have the refectory where they can assemble and talk together. It's not very diverting, I know, but it's something nevertheless. But we have only Messiah le Prévôt, who comes from time to time to lecture his daughter for growing too lovely, I think. It's her only crime, poor child, and to scold me because I don't watch her closely enough. God save the mark. When she doesn't see a living soul in the world except myself, and, aside from what she says to me, doesn't open her mouth except to pray. I beg you, therefore, young man, not to say to anyone that you have been admitted here, that you have inspected the Grand Nestle under my guidance, or that you talk with us for an instant at the Petit Nestle. What? Cried Ascanio. After our visit to the Grand Nestle, I am to return with you to the Petit. In that case I shall. He checked himself, realizing that his joy was carrying him too far. I think it would not be courteous, young man, after presenting yourself, as you did, to Mademoiselle Colombe, who is the mistress of the house in her father's absence, and after asking to speak with me alone. I do not think it would be courteous, I say, to leave the Hotel de Nestle without taking leave of her. But if you prefer not to do so, you are quite at liberty, as you know, to go into the street directly from the Grand Nestle, which is its own exit. No, no, no indeed, cried Ascanio, eagerly. Past. I flatter myself, Dame Perini, that I have been as well brought up as anybody on earth, and that I know what good breeding requires in one's treatment of ladies. But let us do what we have to do, Dame Perini, without a moment's delay, for I am in very great haste. Indeed, now that Ascanio knew that he was to return by way of the Petit Nestle, he was in a great hurry to be done with the Grand. And as Dame Perini was terribly afraid of being surprised by the Provost when she least expected it, she had no inclination to delay Ascanio. So she took down a bunch of keys from behind the door and walked on before him. Let us, in company with Ascanio, east a hasty glance at this Hotel de Nestle, where the principal scenes of our narrative will be laid. The hotel, or rather the Séjour de Nestle, as it was more commonly called at that time, occupied, as our readers already know, the site on the left bank of the Seine, on which the Hotel de Nevis was subsequently built, to be in its turn succeeded by the Mint and the Institute. It was the last building in Paris toward the southwest, and beyond its walls nothing could be seen save the city moat and the verdant lawns of the pre-auxiliary clerks. It was built by a Maori, lord of Nesle in Picardy, toward the close of the 8th century. Philippe le Bel bought it in 1308 and made it his royal residence. In 1520 the Tour de Nesle, a bloody and licentious memory, was separated from it, when the quay, the bridge over the moat, and the Port de Nesle were constructed, and thenceforth the grim tower stood alone upon the river bank, like a sinner doing penance. But the Séjour de Nesle luckily was so vast that the lopping off a part of it was not noticed. It was as large as a small village, a high wall, pierced by a broad ogive door and a smaller servant's door, protected it on the side of the quay. On entering, you found yourself at first in an immense courtyard surrounded by walls. There was a door in the wall at the left and one at the back. Passing through the door at the left, as Ascanio did, you came to a charming little building in the Gothic style of the 14th century. It was a Petit Nestle, which had its own separate garden. If, on the other hand, you passed through the door in the rear wall, you saw at your right the Grand Nestle, all of stone and flanked by 2 turrets, with its high peaked roofs, surrounded by balustrades, its angular facade, its high windows with glass of many colors, and its 20 weather vanes crying in the wind. There was room enough to provide accommodation for 3 bankers of today. If you went on, you lost yourself in all sorts of gardens, and you found among them a tennis court, a bowling green, a foundry, and an arsenal, and still farther on the stable yards, stables, cattle sheds, and sheepfolds, there was accommodation for the establishments of 3 farmers of today. The whole property, it should be said, was sadly neglected, and consequently in very bad condition, For Rainbow and his two assistants hardly sufficed to take proper care of the garden belonging to the Pettinestle, where Colombe raised flowers, and Dame Perini vegetables. But the whole was of vast extent, well lighted and substantially built, and with a slight outlay of trouble and money, it could be made the finest workshop in the world. Even if the place had been infinitely less suitable, Ascanio would have been none the less enchanted with it, as his principal desire was to be brought near to Colombe. His visit to the larger building was made very short. In less time than it takes to write it, the active youth saw everything that there was to see, and formed an opinion upon everything that he saw. Dame Perini, finding it impossible to keep pace with him, good-naturedly handed him the keys, which he faithfully restored to her when his investigation was at an end. "Now, Dame Perini," said he, "I am at your service." "Very good. Let us return for a moment to the Pettinestle, as you agree with me that it is a proper thing to do." "I should say as much. It would be extremely discourteous to do otherwise. But not a word to Colombe of the object of your visit." "Mon Dieu, what shall I say to her, then?" cried Ascanio. "You're easily embarrassed, my handsome lad. Did you not tell me that you are a goldsmith?" "Indeed, yes." "Very well. Talk to her about jewels. That is a subject that always gladdens the heart of the most virtuous maiden. She is or is not a true daughter of Eve, and if she is a true daughter of Eve, she loves anything that glitters. Besides, she has so little diversion in her solitude, poor child, that it would be a blessing to entertain her a little. To be sure, the most suitable entertainment for a girl of her age would be a good marriage, and Master Robert never comes hither that I do not whisper in his ear, 'Find a husband for the poor dear. Pray find a husband for her.'" Without stopping to consider what conjectures as to the relations between herself and the provost might be set on foot by this declaration of a familiar manner of addressing him, Dame Perini led the way back to the Pettinestle and to the room where they had left Colombe. Colombe was still absorbed in thought, and in the same attitude in which we left her. But no one knows how many times she had raised her head and fixed her eyes upon the door through which the comely youth had gone from her sight. Anyone who had observed these oft-repeated glances might have thought that she was expecting him. But as she saw the door turning upon its hinges, Colombe went about her work once more so earnestly that neither Dame Perini nor Ascanio could suspect that it had been interrupted. How she had divined that the young man was following the duenna is something that might have been explained by magnetism, if magnetism had then been invented. "I bring back with me our donor of holy water, my dear Colombe, for he it is, as I thought." I was about to show him out by the door of the Grand Nestle, when he reminded me that he had not taken leave of you. It was true enough, for you didn't say one little word to each other before. However, neither of you is dumb. God be praised. "Dame Perini," faltered Colombe, greatly embarrassed. "Well, what is it? You must not blush like that. Monsieur Ascanio is an honorable young man, as you are a virtuous young woman. Furthermore, it seems that he is an artist in jewels, precious stones, and such gewgaws as suit the fancy of most pretty girls. He will come and show them to you, my child, if you wish." "I need nothing," murmured Colombe. "Possibly not at this moment, but it is to be hoped that you will not die a recluse in this accursed solitude. We are but 16 years old, Colombe, and the day will come when we shall be a lovely fiancé, to whom all sorts of jewels will be presented, and after that a great lady, who must have all sorts of finery. When that time comes, it will be as well to give the preference to this use as to those of some other artist, who surely will not be comparable to him." Colombe was on the rack. Ascanio, to whom Dame Perini's forecasts of the future were but moderately pleasing, noticed her suffering, and came to the rescue of the poor child, to whom direct conversation was 1,000 times less embarrassing than this monologue by a self-constituted interpreter. "Oh, mademoiselle," said he, "do not deny me the great privilege of bringing some of my handiwork to you. It seems to me now as if I made them for you, and as if when making them I was thinking of you. Oh, believe it, I pray you, for we artists in jewels sometimes mingle our own thoughts with the gold and silver and precious stones. In the diadems with which your heads are crowned, the bracelets which encircle your white arms, the necklaces which rest so lovingly upon your shoulders, in the flowers, the birds, the angels, the chimeras, which would make to tremble at your ears, we sometimes embody our respectful adoration. It is our duty as an historian to state that at these soft words Colombe's heart dilated, for Ascanio, mute so long, was speaking at last, and speaking as she had dreamed that he would speak. For without raising her eyes the girl could feel his burning glance fix upon her, and there was nothing, even to the unfamiliar tone of his voice, which did not impart a singular charm to these words which sounded so strangely in Colombe's ears, and a profound and irresistible meaning to the flowing, harmonious language of love, which maidens understand before they can speak it. I know, Ascanio continued, with his eyes still fixed upon Colombe, I know that we can add nothing to your beauty. God has made none the richer by decking out his altar. But we can at least surround your graceful form with those things which are attractive and beautiful like itself. And when we pour humble artifices of splendor and enchantment from the depths of our obscurity see you pass by in a blaze of glory, we console ourselves for being so far below you by the thought that our art has helped to raise you to the height whereon you stand. Oh, monsieur, replied Colombe, covered with confusion, your lovely things will probably be always unfamiliar to me, or at least useless. I live in solitude and obscurity, and so far is it from being the case that the solitude and obscurity are oppressive to me that I confess that I love them. I confess that I would like to live here always, and yet I also confess that I would like well to see your jewels, not for myself but for them, not to wear them, but to admire them. Trembling with fear lest she had said too much, and perhaps with a longing to say even more, Colombe bowed and left the room so swiftly that to the eyes of a man more knowing in such matters her exit would have worn the aspect of a flight. Well, well, exclaimed Dame Perini, that's not a long way from something like coquetry. There is no doubt, young man, that you talk like a book. Yes, one can but believe that you Italians have secret means of fascinating people. No stronger proof is needed than this, that you have enlisted me on your side at once, and upon honor, I find myself wishing that Messire le Prévôt will not deal too hardly with you. Au revoir, young man, and bid your master be on his guard. Warn him that Messire d'Esterville is as hard of heart as a devil, and wields great influence at court, for which reason, if your master will take my advice, he will abandon all thought of living at the Grand Nestle, and especially of taking forcible possession of it. As for you, but we shall see you again, shall we not? Above all, do not believe Colombe. The property of a deceased mother is sufficient to enable her to indulge in baubles 20 times more costly than those you offer her. And look you, bring also some less elaborate articles. It may occur to her to make me a little present. I am not yet, thank God, so old that I need decline a little flirtation. You understand, do you not? Deeming it necessary, the better to make her meaning clear, to enforce a word with a gesture, she laid her hand upon the young man's arm. Ascanio jumped like one suddenly awakened from a sound sleep. Indeed, it seemed to him as if it were all a dream. He could not realize that he was under Colombe's roof, and he doubted whether the white apparition whose melodious voice was still whispering in his ear, whose slender form had just vanished from his sight, was really she for one glance from whose eyes he would have given his life that morning. Overflowing with his present happiness and his future prospects, he promised Dame Perini whatever she wished, without even listening to what she asked him to do. What mattered it to him? Was he not ready to give all that he possessed to see Colombe once more? Thinking that to prolong his visit would be unbecoming, he took leave of Dame Perini, promising to return the next day. As he left the Petit Nestle, Ascanio almost collided with two men who were about to enter. By the way in which one of them stared at him, even more than by his costume, he felt sure that it was a provost. His suspicion was changed to certainty when he saw them knock at the same door by which he had just come out, and he regretted that he had not sooner taken his leave. For who could say that his imprudence would not be visited upon Colombe? To negative the idea that his visit was of any importance, assuming that the provost noticed it, Ascanio walked away without once turning to look back toward the only corner of the world of which he would at that moment have cared to be king. When he returned to the studio, he found Benvenuto absorbed in thought. The man who stopped him in the street was Primaticcio, and he was on his way, like the honorable confrere he was, to inform Cellini that, during the visit Francois I paid him that morning, the imprudent artist had succeeded in making a mortal enemy of Madame la Duchesse d'Étampes. Chapter 7, A Lover and a Friend. One of the two men who entered the Hotel de Nesle as Ascanio emerged therefrom was indeed Messiah Robert d'Esteville, Provost of Paris. Who the other was we shall learn in a moment. 5 minutes after Ascanio's departure, while Colombe was still listening and dreaming in her bedroom, whither she had fled, Dame Perini hurriedly entered and informed the young woman that her father was awaiting her in the adjoining room. "My father!" cried Colombe in alarm. "Mon Dieu! Mon Dieu!" she added in an undertone. "Can it be that he met him?" "Yes, your father, my dear child," rejoined Dame Perini, replying to the only portion of the sentence that she heard, "and with him another old man whom I do not know." "Another old man!" exclaimed Colombe, shuddering instinctively. "Mon Dieu! Dame Perini, what does it mean?" "It is the first time in 2 or 3 years that my father has not come hither alone." However, notwithstanding her alarm, she could but obey, knowing as she did her father's impatient disposition. So she summoned all her courage and returned to the room she had just left with a smile upon her lips. Despite this feeling of dread, which she experienced for the first time and could not explain, she loved Messiah d'Esteville as a daughter should love her father, and although his demeanor toward her was far from expansive, the days on which he visited the Hotel de Nesle were marked as red-letter days among the uniformly gloomy days of her life. Colombe went forward with outstretched arms and her mouth half open, but the provost gave her no time either to embrace him or to speak. He took her hand and led her to the stranger, who was leaning against the flower-laden mantel. "My dear friend," he said, "I present my daughter to you. Colombe," he added, "this is Comte d'Orbec, the king's treasurer and your future husband." Colombe uttered a feeble exclamation, which she at once stifled, out of regard for the requirements of courtesy, but feeling her knees giving way beneath her, she leaned against the back of a chair for support. Fully to understand the horror of this unexpected presentation, especially in Colombe's then frame of mind, it is necessary to know what manner of man this Comte d'Orbec was. Messiah Robert d'Esteville, Colombe's father, was certainly far from handsome. There was in his bushy eyebrows, which he drew together at the least obstacle, physical or moral, that he encountered, a savage expression, and in his whole thick-set figure something heavy and awkward, which caused one to feel but slightly prepossessed in his favor. But beside Comte d'Orbec he seemed like Saint Michael the Archangel beside the dragon. The square head and the strongly accentuated features of the provost did at least indicate resolution and force of character, while his small, piercing gray lynx eyes denoted intelligence. But Comte d'Orbec, lean and withered, with his long arms like spiders' claws, his mosquito-like voice, and his snail-like movements, was not only ugly, he was absolutely hideous. It was the ugliness of the beast and the villain in one. His head was carried on one side, and his face wore a villainous smile and a treacherous expression. So it was that Colombe, at the sight of this revolting creature, who was presented to her as a future husband when her heart and her thoughts and her eyes were still filled with the comely youth who had just gone from that very room, could not, as we have seen, wholly repress an exclamation of dismay. But her strength failed her, and she stood there pale and speechless, gazing terror-stricken into her father's face. "I beseech you to pardon Colombe's confusion, dear friend," the provost continued. "In the first place, she is a little barbarian, who has not been away from here these 2 years past, the air of the time being not over-healthy, as you know, for attractive maids. Secondly, I have made the mistake of not informing her of our plans, which would have been time lost, however, since what I have determined upon needs no person's approval before being put in execution. And lastly, she knows not who you are, and that with your name, your great wealth, and the favor of Madame d'Etampes, you are in a position where everything is possible. But upon reflection, she will appreciate the honor you confer upon us in consenting to ally your ancient blood. With our nobility of more recent date, she will learn that friends of 40 years' standing." "Enough, my dear fellow, enough, in God's name," interposed the Count. Come, my child," he added, addressing Colombe with familiar and insolent assurance, which formed a striking contrast to poor Ascanio's timidity. "Come, compose yourself and call back to your cheeks a little of the lovely coloring that so becomes you. Mon Dieu, I know what a young girl is, you know, and a young woman too for that matter, for I have already been married twice. My dear, good luck. You must not be disturbed like this. I don't frighten you, I hope, eh? Added the Count fatuously, passing his fingers through his scanty mustache and imperial. Your father did wrong to give me the title of husband so suddenly, which always agitates a youthful heart a little when it hears it for the first time. But you will come to it, little one, and will end by saying it yourself with that sweet little mouth of yours. Well, well, you are growing paler and paler. God forgive me. I believe she is fainting. As he spoke, Dorbeck put out his arms to support her, but she stood erect and stepped back as if she feared his touch no less than a serpent's, finding strength to utter a few words. Pardon, monsieur, pardon, father, she faltered. Forgive me, it is nothing, but I hoped. What did you think? What did you hope? Come, tell us quickly, rejoined the provost, fixing his sharp eyes, snapping angrily, upon his daughter. That you would allow me to stay with you always, father, replied Colombe. Since my poor mother's death, you have no one else to love you and care for you, and I had thought. Hold your peace, Colombe, retorted the provost imperatively. I am not old enough as yet to need a keeper, and you have arrived at the proper age to have an establishment of your own. Bon Dieu, interposed Dorbeck, joining once more in the conversation. Accept me without so much ado, my love. With me you will be as happy as one can be, and more than one will envy you, I swear. Mordieu, I am rich, and I propose that you shall be a credit to me. You shall go to court, and shall wear jewels that will arouse the envy. I will not say of the queen, but of Madame d'Etampes herself. I know not what thoughts these last words awoke in Colombe's heart, but the color returned to her cheeks, and she made hold to answer the Count, despite her father's harsh and threatening glance. I will ask my father, Monseigneur, at least to give me time to reflect upon your proposal. What's that? Cried Messiah d'Estoville violently. Not an hour, not a minute. You are from this moment the Count's betrothed. Understand that, and you would be his wife this evening were it not that he is obliged to pay a visit to his estates in Normandy, and you know that my wishes are commands. Reflect indeed. Sapage, Dorbeck, let us leave her ladyship. From this moment, my friend, she is yours, and you may claim her when you will. And now let us go and inspect your future abode. Dorbeck would have been glad to tarry and add a word to what he had already said, but the provost passed his arm through his and led him away grumbling. He contented himself therefore with saluting Colombe with his wicked smile, and went out with Messiah Robert. Behind them Dame Perini entered through another door. She had heard the provost speaking in a loud voice, and guessed that he was as usual scolding his daughter. She arrived in time to receive Colombe in her arms. Oh, mon Dieu, sobbed the poor child, putting her hand over her eyes as if to avoid the sight of the odious Dorbeck, absent though he was. Oh, mon Dieu, is this to be the end? Oh, my golden dreams! Oh, my poor hopes! All is lost, and naught remains of me but to die. We need not ask if this lament, added to Colombe's weakness and pallor, terrified Dame Perini, and at the same time aroused her curiosity. As Colombe sadly needed to relieve her overburdened heart, she described to her worthy governess, weeping the while the bitterest tears she had ever shed, the interview between her father, Comte d'Aubec, and herself. Dame Perini agreed that the suitor was not young or handsome, but as the worst misfortune, in her opinion, that could happen to a woman was to remain single. She insisted that it was better, when all was said, to have an old and ugly, but wealthy and influential husband than none at all. But this doctrine was so offensive to Colombe's heart that she withdrew to her own room, leaving Dame Perini, whose imagination was most active, to build innumerable castles in the air in anticipation of the day when she should rise from the rank of Mademoiselle Colombe's governess to that of Comtesse d'Aubec's dame de compagnie. Meanwhile, the provost and the count were beginning their tour of inspection of the Grand Nestle, as Dame Perini and Ascanio had done an hour earlier. Curious results would follow if walls, which are commonly supposed to have ears, had also eyes and a tongue, and could repeat to those who enter what they have seen and heard on the part of those who have gone before. But as the walls held their peace, and simply looked at the provost and the treasurer, laughing perhaps, after the manner of walls, it was the treasurer who spoke. On my word, he said, as they crossed the courtyard leading from Petit to the Grand Nestle, On my word, the little one will do very well. She is just such a woman as I need, my dear de Storville, virtuous, well-bred, and ignorant. When the first storm has passed over, time will straighten out everything. Believe me, I know how it is. Every little girl dreams of a young, handsome, clever, and wealthy husband. Mon Dieu, I have at least half of the requisite qualities. Few men can say as much, so that's a great point in my favor. Passing from his future wife to the property he was occupy, and speaking with the same shrill, greedy accent of the one as of the other, this old nestle, he continued, is a magnificent habitation, on my honor, and I congratulate you upon it. We shall be marvelously comfortable here, my wife and I, and my whole treasury. Here we will have our own apartments. There will be my offices, and over yonder the servants' quarters. The place as a whole has been allowed to run to seed. But with the expenditure of a little money, which we will find a way to make His Majesty pay, we will give a good account of ourselves. By the way, de Storville, are you perfectly sure of retaining the property? You should take steps to perfect your title to it. So far as I now remember, the king did not give it you, after all. He did not give it me, true, replied the provost with a laugh, but he let me take it, which is much the same thing. Very good, but suppose that some other should play the trick of making a formal request for it from him. Ah, such a one would be very ill received, I promise you, when he should come to take possession, and, being sure as I am of Madame d'Etampes' support in yours, I would make him sorely repent his pretensions. No, no, my dear fellow, my mind is at ease, and the Hotel de Nesle belongs to me as truly as my daughter Colombe belongs to you. Go, therefore, without fear on that score, and return quickly. As the provost uttered these words, the truth of which neither he nor his interlocutor had any reason to doubt, a third personage, escorted by Rainbow the gardener, appeared upon the threshold of the door leading from a quadrangular courtyard into the gardens of the Petit Nesle. It was the Vicomte de Marmain. He also was a suitor for Colombe's hand, but by no means a favored one. He was a fair-haired scamp, with a pink face, consequential, insolent, garrulous, forever boasting of his relations with women, who often used him as a cloak for their serious MOs, overflowing with pride in his post of secretary to the king, which permitted him to approach His Majesty in the same way in which his greyhounds and parrots and monkeys approached him. The provost, therefore, was not deceived by his apparent favor and the superficial familiarity of his relations with His Majesty, which favor and familiarity he owed, so it was said, to his decidedly unmoral additions to the duties of his post. Furthermore, the Vicomte de Marmain had long since devoured all his patrimony, and had no other fortune than the liberality of Francois. How it might happen any day that this liberal disposition would cease, so far as he was concerned, and Messire Robert de Seville was not fool enough to rely, in matters of such importance, upon the caprice of a very capricious monarch. He had therefore gently denied the suit of the Vicomte de Marmain, admitting to him confidentially and under the seal of secrecy that his daughter's hand had long been promised to another. Thanks to this confidential communication, which supplied a motive for the provost's refusal, the Vicomte de Marmain and Messire Robert de Seville had continued to be in appearance the best friends in the world, although from that day the Viscount detested the provost, and the provost was suspicious of the Viscount, who could not succeed in concealing his ransom beneath an affable and smiling exterior from a man so accustomed as Messire Robert to peer into the dark corners of courts and the deepest depths of men's hearts. So it was that, whenever the Viscount made his appearance, the provost expected to find in him, notwithstanding his invariably affable and engaging demeanor, a bearer of bad news, which he would always impart with tears in his eyes, and with a feigned, premeditated grief which squeezes out poison upon a wound, drop by drop. As for Comte d'Orbec, the Vicomte de Marmain had well nigh come to an open rupture with him. It was one of the rare instances of court enmities visible to the naked eye. D'Orbec despised Marmain, because Marmain had no fortune and could make no display. Marmain despised D'Orbec, because D'Orbec was old and had consequently lost the power of making himself agreeable to women. In fine, they mutually detested each other, because, whenever they met upon the same path, one of them had taken something from the other. So it was that when they met on this occasion, the two courtiers greeted each other with that cold, sardonic smile, which is never seen save in palace antechambers, and which means, ah, if we weren't a pair of cowards, how long ago one of us would have ceased to live. Nevertheless, as it is a historian's duty to set down everything, good and bad alike, it is proper to state that they confined themselves to the salutation and this smile, and that Comte d'Orbec, escorted by the provost, and without exchanging a word with Mamain, left the house immediately by the same door by which his enemy entered. Let us hasten to add that, notwithstanding the hatred which kept them asunder, these two men were ready, in case of need, to unite temporarily to destroy a third. Comte d'Orbec having taken his leave, the provost found himself tête-à-tête with the Vicomte de Mamain. He walked toward him with a joyous countenance, in striking contrast to the melancholy visage with which the other awaited him. "Well, my dear provost," said Mamain, to open the conversation, "you seem in extremely good spirits." "While you, my dear Mamain," rejoined the provost, "seem sadly depressed. Simply because, as you know, my poor d'Estorville, my friend's misfortunes afflict me as keenly as my own." Yes, I know your heart," said the provost. "And when I saw you in such a joyous mood, with your future son-in-law, Comte d'Orbec, for your daughter's betrothal to him is no longer a secret, and I congratulate you upon it, my dear d'Estorville. You know that I told you long ago that Colombe's hand was promised, my dear Mamain." "Yes, but, 'pon honor, I cannot understand how you can consent to part from such a fascinating child." "Oh, I do not propose to part from her," replied Messire Robert. "My son-in-law, Comte d'Orbec, will bring his whole establishment across the Seine, and will take up his abode at the Grand Nestle, while I shall spend my unoccupied moments at the Petit." "My poor friend," exclaimed Mamain, shaking his head with an air of profound sadness, and placing one hand upon the provost's arm while with the other he wiped away a tear which did not exist. "Why, poor friend?" demanded Messire Robert. "Come, what have you to tell me now?" "Am I the first, pray, to tell you the unpleasant news?" "What is it? Speak out." "You know, my dear provost, that we must take things philosophically in this world, and there is an old proverb which we poor weak mortals should keep constantly in mind, for it sums up the accumulated wisdom of all nations." "What is the proverb? Say what you have to say." "Man proposes, my dear friend, man proposes, and God disposes. In God's name, what have I proposed for him to dispose of? Say on, I beg you, and let us have done with it. You have intended the Grand Nestle for the residence of your daughter and son-in-law. Most assuredly, and I trust that they will be installed there within 3 months. Undeceive yourself, my dear provost, undeceive yourself. The Hotel de Nesle is no longer your property at this moment. Pardon me for afflicting you thus, but I thought, knowing your somewhat hasty nature, that it would be better for you to learn the news from the mouth of a friend who would spare your feelings in the telling as much as possible, rather than from some malicious fellow who would take a keen delight in your misfortune and brutally ease it in your fay. Alas! No, my friend, the Grand Nestle is yours no longer. Who has taken it from me, I pray to know? His Majesty. His Majesty. Himself. So you see that the disaster is irreparable. When was it done? This morning. If I had not been detained by my duties at the Louvre, you would have been sooner apprised of it. You are mistaken, Mamain. It's some false report set afloat by my enemies, and which you are in too great haste to repeat. I would be glad for many reasons if it was so, but unfortunately I was not told of it. I heard it. You heard it? What? I heard the king with his own month present the Grand Nestle to another. Who is this other? An Italian adventurer, a paltry goldsmith, whose name you perhaps have heard, an intriguing rascal named Benvenuto Cellini, who came from Florence some 2 months since, whom the king has taken upon his shoulders for some unknown reason, and to whom he paid a visit today with his whole court at the Cardinal of Ferrara's hotel, where this pretended artist has established his studio. And you say that you were present, Viscount, when the king presented the Grand Nestle to this wretch. I was, replied Mamain, pronouncing the words very slowly and distinctly, and dwelling upon them with evident relish. "Oh," said the provost, "very good. I am ready for your adventurer. Let him come and take possession of his royal gift. Do you mean that you would offer resistance?" "To be sure. To an order of the king, to an order of God or the devil, to any order, in short, which should undertake to eject me from this place." "Softly, provost, softly," said Mamain. "Over and above the king's wrath, to which you expose yourself, this Benvenuto Cellini is in himself more to be feared than you think. Do you know who I am, Viscount? First of all, he stands very high in His Majesty's good graces, only for the moment, to be sure, but it is none the less true. Do you know that I, the Provost of Paris, represent His Majesty at the Châtelet, that I sit there beneath a canopy, in a short coat and a cloak with a collar, with my sword at my side, a hat with waving plumes on my head, and in my hand a staff covered with blue velvet. Secondly, I will tell you that this accursed Italian makes no scruple of offering combat, as if he stood on equal terms with them, to princes, cardinals, and popes. Do you know that I have a private seal which imparts the fullest authority to those documents to which it is affixed? It is said, furthermore, that the damned bully wounds or kills recklessly everyone who ventures to oppose him. Do you not know that a bodyguard of 24 men-at-arms is at my orders night and day? They say that he attacked a goldsmith against whom he had a grudge, although he was surrounded by a guard of 60 men. You forget that the Hotel de Nesle is fortified, that the walls are crenellated, and there are machiculas above the doors, to say nothing of the city fortifications which render it impregnable on one side. It is said that he is as thoroughly at home in the science of sieges as Bayard or Antonio de Lara. As to that we shall see. I am sorely afraid. I will bide my time. Look you, my dear friend, will you allow me to offer you a little advice? Say on, so let it be brief. Do not try to struggle with one who is stronger than you. Stronger than I, a paltry Italian mechanic. Viscount, you exasperate me. You may find reason to repent. 'Pon honor, I speak whereof I know. Viscount, you try my temper. Consider that the fellow has the king on his side, and I have Madame d'Etampes. His Majesty may take it ill of you to resist his will. I have already done it, monsieur, and successfully. Yes, I know, in the matter of the toll at the Bridge of Mandes. But what? One risks nothing, or very little at all events, in resisting a weak, good-natured king, while one risks everything in entering into a contest with a powerful, formidable opponent like Benvenuto Cellini. By Mahomet's belly, Viscount, do you propose to drive me mad? On the contrary, my purpose is to make you discreet. Enough, Viscount, enough. Ah, the villain shall pay day, I swear, for these moments that your friendship has caused me to pass. God grant it, Provost, God grant it. Very good, very good. You have nothing else to tell me. No, I believe not. The Viscount replied, as if he were trying to recall some item of news which would make a fitting pendant to the other. Very well, adieu, cried the Provost. Adieu, my poor friend. Adieu. At all events I have given you warning. Adieu. I shall have no reason to reproach myself. That consoles me. Adieu, adieu. Good luck attend you. But I must say that I express that wish with but little hope of its being gratified. Adieu, 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 adieu. And the Vicomte de Mamain, sighing as if his heart would burst, and with grief-stricken face, took his departure, gesticulating mournfully after he had pressed the Provost's hand as if he were saying farewell to him forever. The Provost followed him, and with his own hand secured the street door behind him. It will readily be understood that this friendly conversation had heated Messiah d'Estavel's blood and stirred his bile to an extreme degree. He was looking around in search of someone upon whom he might vent his ill humor, when he suddenly remembered the young man whom he had seen emerging from a Grand Nestle as he entered with Comte d'Olbeck. As Rainbow was at hand, he had not far to seek for one who could answer his questions touching that stranger. So he summoned the gardener with one of those imperative gestures which admit no delay, and asked him what he knew about the young man. The gardener replied that the individual to whom his master referred had presented himself in the king's name to inspect the Grand Nestle, that he did not consider it his duty to take anything upon himself, and therefore referred him to Dame Perini, who good-naturedly showed him over the whole establishment. The provost thereupon rushed to the Petit Nestle to demand an explanation from the worthy duenna, but she unfortunately had just gone out to purchase the weekly supply of provisions. There remained Colombe, but as the provost could not believe that she had seen the youthful stranger, after the forcible and explicit terms in which he had forbidden Dame Perini to allow good-looking young men to approach her, he did not even speak to her on the subject. As his duties required him to return to the Grand Châtelet, he departed, ordering Rainbow, on pain of instant dismissal, to admit no person to the Grand or Petit Nestle, whoever he might be, or in whosoever name he might come, especially the miserable adventurer who had been admitted previously. So it was that, when Ascanio presented himself on the following day with his ways, in accordance with Dame Perini's suggestion, Rainbow simply opened a small window and informed him through the bars that the Hotel de Nesle was closed to everybody, particularly to him. Ascanio, as may be imagined, withdrew in despair, but we hasten to say that he did not for a moment attribute this extraordinary reception to Colombe. The maiden had bestowed but one glance upon him, had uttered but one sentence, but that glance was so eloquent of shy affection, and there was such a wealth of loving melody in that one sentence, that it had seemed to Ascanio since he parted from her as if an angel's voice was singing in his heart.